Section 28 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The three little crones, each with something big. There was once a king's son and a king's daughter who dearly loved each other. The young princess was good and fair, and well spoken of by all, but her disposition was more inclined to pleasure and dissipation than to handiworks and domestic occupations. To the old queen this appeared very wrong, and she said she would have no one for a daughter-in-law that was not as skilled in such matters as she herself had been in her youth. She therefore opposed the prince's marriage in all sorts of ways. As the queen would not recall her words, the prince went to her and said it would be well to make a trial, whether the princess were not as skilful as the queen herself. This seemed to everyone a very rash proposal, seeing that the prince's mother was a very diligent, laborious person, and span and sewed and wove both night and day, so that no one ever saw her like. The prince, however, carried his point. The fair princess was sent into the maiden's bower, and the queen sent her a pound of flax to spin. But the flax was to be spun ere dawn of day, otherwise the damsel was never more to think of the prince for a husband. When left alone, the princess found herself very ill at ease, for she knew well that she could not spin the queen's flax, and yet trembled at the thought of losing the prince, who was so dear to her. She therefore wandered about the apartment and wept, incessantly wept. At this moment the door was opened very softly, and there stepped in a little woman of singular appearance and yet more singular manners. The little woman had enormously large feet, at which everyone who saw her must be wonderstruck. She greeted the princess with, "Peace be with you." "And peace be with you," answered the princess. The old woman then asked, "Why is the fair damsel so sorrowful tonight?" The princess answered, "I may well be sorrowful. The queen has commanded me to spin a pound of flax. If I have not completed it before dawn, I lose the young prince, whom I love so dearly." The old woman then said, "Be of good cheer, fair maiden. If there is nothing else, I can help you, but then you must grant me a request which I will name." At these words the princess was overjoyed, and asked what it was the old woman desired. "I am called," she said, "Mother Bigfoot, and I require for my aid no other reward than to be present at your wedding. I have not been at a wedding since the queen your mother-in-law stood as bride." The princess readily granted her desire, and they parted. The princess then lay down to sleep, but could not close her eyes the whole livelong night. Early in the morning, before dawn, the door was opened, and the little woman again entered. She approached the king's daughter, and handed to her a bundle of yarn as white as snow and as fine as cobweb, saying, "See, such beautiful yarn I have not spun since I span for the queen, when she was about to be married, but that was long, long ago." Having so spoken, the little woman disappeared, and the princess fell into a refreshing slumber. But she had not slept long when she was awakened by the old queen, who was standing by her bed, and who asked her whether the flax were all spun. The princess said that it was, and handed the yarn to her. The queen must needs appear content, but the princess could not refrain from observing that her apparent satisfaction did not proceed from good will. Before the day was over, the queen said she would put the princess to yet another proof. For this purpose she sent the yarn to the maiden bower together with a yarn roll and other implements, and ordered the princess to weave it into a web, but which must be ready before sunrise. If not, the damsel must never more think of the young prince. When the princess was alone, she again felt sad at heart, for she knew that she could not weave the queen's yarn, and yet less reconcile herself to the thought of losing the prince to whom she was so dear. She therefore wandered about the apartment and wept bitterly. At that moment the door was opened softly, and in stepped a very little woman of singular figure and still more singular manners. The little woman had an enormously large back, so that everyone who saw her must be struck with astonishment. She too greeted the princess with "Peace be with you," and received for answer, "Peace be with you." The old woman said, "Why is the fair damsel so sad and sorrowful?" "I may well be sorrowful," answered the princess. "The queen has commanded me to weave all this yarn into a web, and if I have not completed it by the morning before sunrise, I shall lose the prince who loves me so dearly." The woman then said, "Be comforted, fair damsel. If it is nothing more, I will help you. But then you must consent to one condition, which I will name to you." At these words the princess was highly delighted, and asked what the condition might be. "I am called Mutter Bigback, and I desire no other reward than to be at your wedding. I have not been to any wedding since the queen your mother-in-law stood as bride." The king's daughter readily granted this request, and the little woman departed. The princess then lay down to sleep, but was unable to close her eyes the whole night. In the morning, before daybreak, the door was opened and the little woman entered. She approached the princess and handed to her a web white as snow and close as a skin, so that its like was never seen. The old woman said, "See, such even threads I have never woven since I wove for the queen when she was about to be married, but that was long, long ago." The woman then disappeared, and the princess fell into a short slumber, but from which she was roused by the old queen, who stood by her bed and inquired whether the web were ready. The princess told her that it was, and handed to her the beautiful piece of weaving. The queen must now appear content for the second time, but the princess could easily see that she was not so from good will. The king's daughter now flattered herself that she should be put to no further trial, but the queen was of a different opinion, for she shortly after sent the web down to the maiden bower with the message that the princess should make it into shirts for the prince. The shirts were to be ready before sunrise, otherwise the damsel must never hope to have the young prince for a husband. When the princess was alone, she felt sad at heart, for she knew that she could not sew the queen's web, and yet could not think of losing the king's son, to whom she was so dear. She therefore wandered about the chamber and shed a flood of tears. This moment the door was softly opened, and in stepped a very little woman of most extraordinary appearance and still more extraordinary manners. The little woman had an enormously large thumb, so that everyone who saw it must be wonderstruck. She also greeted the princess with
"Peace be with you,"
and likewise received for answer, "Peace be with you." She then asked the young damsel why she was so sad and lonely. "I may well be sad," answered the princess. "The queen has commanded me to make this web into shirts for the king's son, and if I have not finished them tomorrow before sunrise, I shall lose my beloved prince who holds me so dear." The woman then said,
"Be of good cheer, fair maiden. If it is nothing more, I can help you. But then you must agree to a condition which I will mention."
At these words the princess was overjoyed, and asked the little woman what it was she wished.
"I am,"
answered she,
"called Mother Big Thumb,
and I desire no other reward than that I may be present at your wedding. I have not been at the wedding since the queen, your mother-in-law, stood as bride." The princess willingly assented to this condition, and the little woman departed. But the princess lay down to sleep, and slept so soundly that she did not even dream once of her dear prince. Early in the morning, before the sun had risen, the door was opened, and the little woman entered. She approached the bed, awakened the princess, and gave her some shirts that were sewed and stitched so curiously that their like was never seen. The old woman said,
"See, so beautifully as this I have not sewn since I sewed for the queen when she was about to stand as bride, but that was long, long ago."
With these words the little woman disappeared, for the queen was then at the door, being just come to inquire whether the shirts were ready. The king's daughter said that they were, and handed her the beautiful work. At the sight of them, the queen was so enraged that her eyes flashed with fury. She said, "Well, take him then. I could never have imagined that thou wast so clever as thou art." She then went her way, slamming the door after her. The king's son and the king's daughter were now to be united, as the queen had promised, and great preparations were made for the wedding. But the joy of the princess was not without alloy when she thought of the singular guests that were to be present. When some time had elapsed, and the wedding was being celebrated in the good old fashion, yet not one of the little old women appeared, although the bride looked about in every direction. At length, when it was growing late, and the guests were going to table, the princess discerned the 3 little women as they sat in a corner of the dining hall at a table by themselves. At the same moment the king stepped up to them and inquired who they were, as he had never seen them before. The eldest of the 3 answered,
"I am called Mother Bigfoot, and have such large feet because I have been obliged to sit spinning so much in my time."
"Oh, ho," said the king,
"If such be the consequence, my son's wife shall never spin another thread."
Then turning to the second little woman, he inquired the cause of her uncommon appearance. The old woman answered,
"I am called Mother Big Back, and am so broad behind because I have been obliged to sit weaving so much in my time."
"Oh, ho," said the king,
"Then my son's wife shall weave no more."
Lastly, turning to the third old woman, he asked her name. When Mother Big Thumb, rising from her seat, told him that she had got so large a thumb because she had sewed so much in her time,
"Oh, ho,"
said the king,
"then my son's wife shall never sew another stitch."
Thus the fair princess obtained the king's son, and also escaped from spinning and weaving and sewing for all the rest of her life. When the wedding was over, the three little women went their way, and no one knew whither they went, nor whence they came. The prince lived happy and content with his consort, and all passed on smoothly and peaceably. Only the princess was not so industrious as her strict mother-in-law. The fairies are always glad when people do not find out who it is that has benefited them. For of course, Mother Bigfoot, Mother Bigback, and Mother Big Thumb were really fairies in disguise, and were therefore pleased at the end of the Norwegian fairy's tale. "Now," said Titania, and of course her word was law, "I think I should like a song. Nymphidia, sing to us." Nymphidia at once stood up on the stool, and all the Queen's maids of honour stood around it as they sang the Queen's song. End of section 28. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 29 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Queen's Song. Round about, in a fine ringer, thus we dance, and thus we sing. Trip and go, to and fro, over this arena, all about, in and out, for our brave Gowina. Round about, in a fine ringer, thus we dance, and thus we sing. Trip and go, to and fro, over this arena, all about, in and out, for our brave Gowina. We have danced round about in a fine ringer. We have danced lustily, and thus we sing. All about, in and out, over this arena, to and fro, trip and go, to our brave Queen. Nymphidia and all the maids of honour, having sung this little song to their queen, Oberon thought it was time that Bottom should be made to tell a tale. And he, you may be sure, made a clumsy enough figure as he took his seat on the tale-teller's stool, scratched his head, and said he didn't know any fairy tales. He tried to get away, but could not rise until the king would let him. Then, when he did not begin quickly enough, Titania whispered to her maids of honour, and Hop, Mop, and Drop, Pip, Drip, and Skip, Tub, Tib, and Tick, Pink, Pin, and Quick, Gill, and Tit, Whap, Win, and Mit, all danced about poor Bottom, pinching and pulling and teasing him until he roared again, and the whole fairy kingdom rang with peals of laughter. "Tell 'em about Billy McDaniel," called out Flute. And without any preface, Bottom at once began telling the story of the Three Sneezes. End of section 29. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 30 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Three Sneezes. Bully McDaniel was once as likely a young man as ever shook his brogue at a patron, emptied a quart or handled a shillelagh for fearing nothing but the want of drink, caring for nothing but who should pay for it, and thinking of nothing but how to make fun over it. Drunk or sober, a word or a blow was ever the way with Billy McDaniel, and a mighty easy way it is of either getting into or of ending a dispute. More's the pity that, through the means of his thinking and fearing and caring for nothing, this same Billy McDaniel fell into bad company, for surely the good people are the worst of all company anyone could come across. It so happened that Billy was going home one clear frosty night, not long after Christmas. The moon was round and bright, but although it was as fine a night as heart could wish for, he felt pinched with the cold. "By my word," chattered Billy, "a drop of good liquor would be no bad thing to keep a man's soul from freezing in him, and I wish I had a full measure of the best." "Never wish it twice, Billy," said a little man in a three-cornered hat, bound all about with gold lace and with great silver buckles in his shoes, so big it was a wonder how he could carry 'em. And he held out a glass as big as himself, filled with as good liquor as ever I looked on or lip tasted. "Success, my little feller," says Billy McDaniel, nothing daunted, though well he knew the little man belonged to the good people. "Here's your health anyway, and thank you kindly, no matter who pays for the drink." And he took the glass and drained it to the very bottom, without ever taking a second breath to it. "Success," says the little man, "and you're heartily welcome, Billy, but don't think to cheat me as you've done others. Out with your purse and pay me like a gentleman." "Is it I pay you?" said Billy. "Could I not just take you up and put you in my pocket as easily as a blackberry?" "Billy McDaniel," says the little man, getting very angry, "you shall be my servant for 7 years and a day, and that is the way I will be paid, so make ready to follow me." When Billy heard this, he began to be very sorry for having used such bold words towards the little man, and he felt himself, yet he could not tell how, obliged to follow the little man the livelong night, about the country, up and down, and over hedge and ditch, and through bog and brake, without any rest. When morning began to dawn, the little man turned round to him and said, "You may now go home, Billy, but on your peril don't fail to meet me in the fort field tonight, or if you do it may be the worse for you in the long run. If I find you a good servant, you'll find me an indulgent master." Home went Billy McDaniel. Though he was tired and weary enough, never a wink of sleep could he get for thinking of the little man. But he was afraid not to do his bidding, so he got up in the evening, and away he went to the fort field. He was not long there before the little man came towards him and said, "Billy, I want to go a long journey tonight, so saddle one of my horses, and you may saddle another for yourself, as you're to go along with me, and may be tired after your walk last night." Billy thought this very considerate of his master, and thanked him accordingly. But he said, "If I may be so bold, sir, I would ask which is the way to your stable, for never a thing do I see but the fort here, and the old thorn tree in the corner of the field, and the stream running at the bottom of the hill with a bit of bog over against us." "Ask no questions, Billy," said the little man, "but go over to that bit of bog, and bring me 2 of the strongest rushes you can find." Billy did accordingly, wondering what the little man would be at, and he picked out 2 or 3 of the stoutest rushes he could find, with a little bunch of brown blossoms stuck at the side of each, and brought them back to his master. "Get up, Billy," said the little man, taking one of the rushes from him and striding across it. "Where shall I get up, please your honour?" said Billy. "Why, upon horseback, like me, to be sure," said the little man. "Is it after making a fool of me you'd be," said Billy, "bidding me get a horseback upon that bit of a rush? Maybe you want to persuade me that the rush I pulled out but a while ago with the bog over there is a horse." "Up and up, and no words," said the little man, looking very angry. "The best horse you ever rode was but a fool to it." So Billy, thinking all this was in joke, and fearing to vex his master, straddled across the rush. "Brum, brum, brum," cried the little man 3 times, which in English means to become great, and Billy did the same after him. Presently the rushes swelled up into fine horses, and away they went full speed. But Billy, who'd put the rush between his legs without much minding how he did it, found himself sitting on horseback the wrong way, which was rather awkward, with his face to the horse's tail, and so quickly had his steed started off with him that he had no power to turn round, and there was therefore nothing for it but to hold on by the tail. At last they came to their journey's end, and stopped at the gate of a fine house. "Now, Billy," said the little man, "do as you see me do, and follow me close. But as you did not know your horse's head from his tail, mind that your own head does not spin round until you can't tell whether you're standing on it or on your heels. For remember that old liquor, though able to make a cat speak, can make a man dumb." The little man then said some queer kind of words, out of which Billy could make no meaning, but he contrived to say them after him for all that. And then they both went through the keyhole of the door, through one keyhole after another, till they got into the wine cellar, which was well stored with all kinds of wine. The little man fell to drinking as hard as he could, and Billy, no way disliking the example, did the same. "The best of master are you, surely," said Billy to him, "no matter who's the next, and well pleased will I be with your service if you continue to give me plenty to drink." "I've made no bargain with you," said the little man, "and will make none, but up and follow me." Away they went through keyhole after keyhole, and each mounting upon the rush which he left at the hall door, scampered off, kicking the clouds before him like snowballs, as soon as the words "brum, brum, brum" had passed their lips. When he came back to the fort field, the little man dismissed Billy, bidding him be there the next night at the same hour. Thus did they go on, night after night, shaping their course one night here and another night there, sometimes north and sometimes east and sometimes south, until there was not a gentleman's wine cellar in all Ireland they had not visited, and could tell the flavour of every wine in it as well. Aye, better than the butler himself. One night, when Billy McDaniel met the little man as usual in the fort field, and was going to the bog to fetch the horses for their journey, his master said to him, "Billy, I shall want another horse tonight, for maybe we may bring back more company than we take." So Billy, who now knew better than to question any order given to him by his master, brought a third rush, much wondering who it might be that would travel back in their company, and whether he was about to have a fellow servant. "If I have," thought Billy, "he shall go and fetch the horses from the bog every night, for I don't see why I am not every inch of me as good a gentleman as my master." Well, away they went, Billy leading the third horse, and never stopped until they came to a snug farmer's house in the county Limerick, close under the old castle of Carrigogunniel, that was built, they say, by the great Brian Boru. Within the house there was a great carousing going forward, and the little man stopped outside for some time to listen. Then, turning round all of a sudden, said, "Billy, I'll be 1,000 years old tomorrow." "God bless us, sir," said Billy, "will you?" "Don't say these words again, Billy," said the little man, "or you will be my ruin forever. Now, Billy, as I'll be 1,000 years in the world tomorrow, I think it's full time for me to get married." "I think so too, without any kind of doubt at all," said Billy, "if you ever mean to marry." "And to that purpose," said the little man, "have I come all the way to Carrigogunniel, for in this house this very night is young Darby Riley, going to be married to Bridget Rooney, and she's as tall and comely a girl, and has come of decent people. I think of marrying her myself and taking her off with me." "What will Darby Riley say to that?" said Billy. "Silence," said the little man, putting on a mighty severe look. "I did not bring you here with me to ask questions." And without holding further argument, he began saying the queer words which had the power of passing him through the keyholes free as air, and which Billy thought himself mighty clever to be able to say after him. In they both went, and for the better view in the company, the little man perched himself up as nimbly as a cock sparrow upon one of the big beams which went across the house, over all their heads. Billy did the same upon another facing him, but not being much accustomed to roosting in such a place, his legs hung down as untidy as may be, and it was quite clear he had not taken part in after the way in which the little man had bundled himself up together. The little man being tailor all his life, he could not have sat more contentedly upon his haunches. There they were, both master and man, looking down upon the fun that was going forward. And under them were the priest and the piper, and the father of Darby Royley, with Darby's two brothers and his uncle's son, and they were both the father and the mother of Bridget Rooney, and proud enough the old couple were that night with their daughter. It's good right they had. And her 4 sisters, brand new ribbons in their caps, and her 3 brothers all looking as clean and as clever as any 3 boys in Munster. And there were uncles and aunts and gossips and cousins enough besides to make a full house of it. Plenty was there to eat and drink on the table for every one of them. They had been double the number. Now it happened, just as Mrs. Rooney had helped his reverence to the first cut of the pig's head which was placed before her, beautifully bolstered up with white savoys, that the bride gave a sneeze which made everyone at the table start. But no one said God bless us, all thinking that the priest would have done so, as he ought if he had done his duty. No one wished to take the word out of his mouth, which unfortunately was preoccupied with pig's head and greens. And after a moment's pause, the fun and merriment of the bridal feast went on without the pious benediction. Of this circumstance, both Billy and his master were no inattentive spectators from their exalted stations. "Ha!" exclaimed the little man, throwing one leg from under him with a joyous flourish, and his eye twinkled with a strange light while his eyebrows became elevated into the curvature of Gothic arches. "Ha!" said he, leering down at the bride and then up at Billy. "I have half of her now, surely. Let her sneeze out twice more and she's mine, in spite of priest, mass book, and Darby Royley." Again the fair Bridget sneezed, but it was so gently, and she blushed so much, that few except the little man took, or seemed to take, any notice, and no one thought of saying God bless us. Billy all this time regarded the poor girl with most rueful expression of countenance, for he could not help thinking what a terrible thing it was for a nice young girl of 19, with large blue eyes, transparent skin, and dimpled cheeks suffused with health and joy, to be obliged to marry an ugly bit of a little man who was 1,000 years old, barring a day. At this critical moment the bride gave a third sneeze, and Billy roared out with all his might, "God save us!" Whether this exclamation resulted from his soliloquy, or from the mere force of habit, he never could tell exactly himself. But no sooner was it uttered than the little man, his face glowing with rage and disappointment, sprung from the beam on which he had perched himself, and shrieking out in the voice of a cracked bagpipe, "I discharge you from my service, Billy McDaniel. Take that for your wages," gave poor Billy a most furious kick in the back, which sent his unfortunate servant sprawling upon his face and his hands right in the middle of the supper table. If Billy was astonished, how much more so was every one of the company into which he was thrown with so little ceremony. But when they heard his story, Father Cooney laid down his knife and fork, and married the young couple out of hand with all speed, and Billy McDaniel danced the rinker at their wedding, and plenty did he drink at it too, which was what he thought more of than dancing. Bottom was mighty glad when his story was over, for he did not like the feeling that he could not get up from the stool when he tried, and he did not like to hear how small a voice he was speaking in. He would have liked to speak big and show what a great fellow he was in that queer company. But there he sat, unable to move, and roaring as gently as any sucking dove, to use his own words. As soon as he had got to the last word of his story, he found that he could get up, and off he floundered to his companions. "Another fairy this time," said King Oberon, as though he had not altogether relished Bottom's story. "The Danish elves has told us nothing yet." At this, which was of course equal to a command, a Danish elf came forward, seated himself, and began to tell about the Elf Hill. End of section 30. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 31 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Elf Hill. Some lizards were nimbly running in and out of the clefts in an old tree. They understood each other very well, for they all spoke lizard language. "What a rumbling and grumbling is going on inside the old elf hill," said one of the lizards. "I've not closed my eyes for the last 2 nights for the noise. I might just as well be having a toothache for all the sleep I get." "There is something up inside," said the other lizard. "They propped up the top of the hill on 4 red-postal cockcrow this morning to air it out thoroughly, and the elf maidens have been learning some new dancing steps, which they are always practicing. There must certainly be something going on." "Yes, I was talking to an earthworm of my acquaintance about it," said the third lizard. "He came straight up out of the hill where he had been boring into the earth for days and nights. He had heard a good deal, for the miserable creature can't see, but it can feel its way, and it plays the part of eavesdropper to perfection. They're expecting visitors in the elf hill, grand visitors, but who they are the earthworm refused to say, or perhaps he did not know. All the will-o'-the-wisps are ordered for a procession of torches, as it is called, and the silver and gold plate, of which there is any amount in the hill, is all being polished up and put out in the moonlight." "Whoever can the strangers be?" said all the lizards together. "What on earth is happening? Hark! What a humming and buzzing!" At this moment the elf hill opened, and an elderly elf maiden tripped out. She was hollow behind, but otherwise quite attractively dressed. She was the old elf king's housekeeper, and a distant relative. She wore an amber heart upon her forehead. She moved her legs at a great pace, trip, trip. Good heavens, how fast she tripped over the ground! She went right down to the nightjar in the swamp. "You're invited to the elf hill for tonight," she said to him. "But will you be so kind as to charge yourself with the other invitations? You must make yourself useful in other ways, as you don't keep house yourself. We are going to have some very distinguished visitors, goblins, who always have something to say, and so the old elf king means to show what he can do." "Who is to be invited?" asked the nightjar. "Well, everybody may come to the big ball, even human beings, if they can only talk in their sleep or do something else after our fashion. But the choice is strictly to be limited for the grand feast. We will only have the most distinguished people. I have had a battle with the elf king about it, because I hold that we mustn't even include ghosts. The merman and his daughters must be invited first. I don't suppose they care much about coming on dry land, but I shall see that they each have a wet stone to sit on, or something better, so I won't expect they'll decline this time. All the old demons of the first class with tails, the river god, and the wood sprites, and I don't think we can pass over the grave pig, the hell horse, and the church grim, though they belong to the clergy. They were not of our people, but that's merely on account of their office. They are closely connected with us, and still visit us very frequently." "Brog," said the nightjar, and he flew off to issue the invitations. The elf maidens had already begun to dance, and they danced the scarf dance, with scarves of women of mist and moonshine. These have a lovely effect to those who care for that kind of thing. The great hall in the middle of the elf hill had been thoroughly polished up for the occasion. The floor was washed in moonshine, and the walls were rubbed over with witch's fat, and this made them shine with many colours, like a tulip petal. The kitchen was full of frogs on spits, stuffed snakeskins, and salads of toadstool spawn, moose snouts, and hemlock. And then there was beer, brewed by the marsh witch, and sparkling saltpetre wine from the vaults. Everything of the best, and rusty nails and church window panes among the kickshaws. The old elf king had his golden crown polished with a pounded slate pencil. Aye, and it was a head boy's slate pencil too, and they are not so easy to get. They hung up fresh curtains in the bedroom, and fixed them with the slime of snails. Yes, indeed, there was a humming and a buzzing. "Now we will fumigate with horsehair and pig's bristles, and then I can do no more," said the old elf servant. "Dear father," said the youngest of the daughters, "are you not going to tell me who these grand strangers are?" "Well, well," he said, "I suppose I must tell you now. 2 of my daughters must prepare themselves to be married. 2 will certainly make marriages. The old trolled chieftain from Norway, that lives on the Dovrefield among his many rock castles and fastnesses and gold works, which are better than you would expect, is coming down here with his 2 sons. They are coming to look for wives. The old troll is a regular, honest Norwegian veteran, straightforward and merry, I used to know him in the olden days when we drank to our good fellowship. He came here to fetch a wife, but she is dead now. She was a daughter of the king of the chalk cliffs at Muin. As the saying is, he took his wife on the chalk. That is, bought her on tick. I'm quite anxious to see the old fellow. The sons, they say, are a pair of overgrown, ill-mannered cubs, but perhaps they're not so bad. I dare say they will improve as they grow older. See if he can't lick them into shape a bit. And when did he come? Asked one of the daughters. That depends upon wind and weather, said the elf king. They travel economically, and they will take their chance of a ship. I wanted them to come round by Sweden, but the old fellow can't bring himself to that yet. He doesn't march with the times, but I don't hold with that. At this moment, 2 will-o'-the-wisps came hopping along, one faster than the other, so of course one arrived before the other. They're coming, they cried. Give me my crown, and let me stand in the moonlight, said the elf king. The daughters raised their scarfs and curtsied to the ground. There stood the troll chieftain from the Dovre field. He wore a crown of hardened icicles and polished fir cones, and besides this he had on a bearskin coat and snowshoes. His sons, on the other hand, had bare necks and wore no braces because they were strong men. Is that a hill? Asked the youngest of the brothers, pointing to the elf hill. We should call it a hole in Norway. Lads, cried the old man, holes go inwards, hills go upwards. Haven't you got eyes in your heads? The only thing that astonished them, they said, was that they understood the language without any trouble. Don't make fools of yourselves, said the old man. One might think you were only half-baked. Then they went into the elf hill, where the company was of the grandest. Although they had been got together in such a hurry, you might almost say they had been blown together. It was all charming, and arranged to suit everyone's taste. The merman and his daughters sat at the table in great tubs of water, and said it was just like being at home. Everybody had excellent table manners, except the 2 young Norwegian trolls. They put their feet up on the table, but then they thought anything they did was right. Take your feet out of the way of the dishes, said the old troll, and they obeyed him, but not at once. They tickled the ladies they took in to dinner with fir cones out of their pockets, and they pulled off their boots so as to be quite comfortable, and handed the boots to the ladies to hold. Their father, the old troll chieftain, was very different. He told no end of splendid stories about the proud Norwegian mountains, and the waterfalls rashing down in white foam with a roar like thunder. He told them about the salmon leaping up against the rushing water when the nixies played with golden harps. Then he went on to tell them about the sparkling winter nights when the sledge bells rang and the lads flew over the ice with blazing lights, the ice which was so transparent that you could see the startled fish darting away under your feet. Yes, indeed, he could tell stories. You could see and hear the things he described, the sawmills going, the men and maids singing their songs, and dancing the merry hauling dance. Huzzah! All at once, the old troll gave the elf housekeeper a smacking kiss. Such a kiss it was, and yet they were not a bit related. Then the elf maidens had to dance, first plain dancing and then step dancing, and it was most becoming to them. Then came a fancy dance. Preserve us! How nimble they were on their legs! You couldn't tell where they began or where they ended. You couldn't tell which were arms and which were legs. They were all mixed up together like shavings in a saw pit. They twirled round and round so often that it made the hell horse feel quite giddy and unwell, and he had to leave the table. Brrr, said the old troll. There is some life in those legs. What else can they do besides dancing and pointing their toes and all those whirligigs? We'll soon show you, said the elf king, and he called out his youngest daughter. She was thin and transparent as moonshine, and was the most ethereal of all the daughters. She put a little white stick in her mouth, and vanished instantly. This was her accomplishment. But the Troll said he did not like that accomplishment in a wife, nor did he think his boys would appreciate it. The second one could walk by her own side as if she had a shadow, and no elves have shadows. The third was quite different. She had studied in the Marsh Witch's brewery and understood larding alder stumps with glowworms. "She will be a good housewife," said the Troll, and then he saluted her with his eyes instead of drinking her health, for he did not want to drink too much. Now came the turn of the fourth. She had a big golden harp to play, and when she touched the first string, everybody lifted up their left legs, for all the elfin folk are left-legged. But when she touched the second string, everybody had to do what she wished. "She's a dangerous woman," said the Troll, but both his sons left the hill, for they were tired of it all. "And what can the next daughter do?" asked the old Troll. "I have learned to like the Norwegians," she said, "and I shall never marry unless I can go to Norway." But the smallest of the sisters whispered to the Troll that is only because she once heard a song which said that when the world came to an end, the rocks of Norway would still stand. And that is why she wants to go there. She's so afraid of being exterminated. "Ho, ho, 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 ho," said the Troll. "So that slipped out. But what can the seventh do?" "The sixth becomes before the seventh," said the Elf King, for he could reckon, but she would not come forward. "I can only tell people the truth," she said. "Nobody cares for me, and I have enough to do in making my winding sheet." Now came the seventh and last. What could she do? Well, she could tell stories, as many as ever she liked. "Here are my 5 fingers," said the old Troll. "Tell me a story for each one." The elf maiden took hold of his wrist, and he chuckled and laughed till he nearly choked. Then she came to the 4th finger, which had a gold ring on it, as if it knew there was to be a betrothal. The Troll said, "Hold fast, what have you got? The hand is yours. I will have you for a wife myself." The elf maiden said that the stories about Gulbrand, the 4th finger, and little Peter Playman, the 5th, had not yet been told. "Never mind, keep those till winter, then you shall tell us about the fir and the birch and the fairy gifts and the tingling frost. You shall have every opportunity of telling us stories. Nobody up there does it yet. We will sit in the stone hall where the pine logs blaze and drink mead out of the golden horns of the old Norwegian kings. The river god gave me a couple. When we sit there, the mountain sprite comes to pay us a visit, and he will sing you the songs of the satyr girls. The salmon will leap in the waterfalls and beat against the stone wall, but it won't get in. Ah, you may believe me when I say that we lead a merry life there in good old Norway." "But where are the lads?" Yes, where were the lads? They were running about the fields, blowing out the will-o'-the-wisps who came so willingly for the torchlight procession. "Why do you gad about there?" said the Troll. "I've taken a mother for you. Now you can come and take one of the aunts." But the lads said they would rather make a speech and drink toasts. They had no wish to marry. Then they made their speeches and drank toasts and tipped their glasses up to show that they had emptied them. After that, they pulled off their coats and went to sleep on the table, to show that they were quite at home. But the old Troll danced round and round the room with his young bride, and exchanged boots with her, which was grander than exchanging rings. "There is the cock crowing," said the old housekeeper. "Now we must shut the shutters so that the sun may not burn us up." Then the hill closed up, but the lizards went running up and down the clefts of the tree, and they said to each other, "Ah, how much I liked the old Troll." "I liked the boys better," said the earthworm, but then it couldn't see. Poor miserable creature that it was. "That reminds me of another story," said the French fay, who had already told one story, but was evidently ready and willing to tell another. "We don't want to hear 2 stories that are like each other,"
said King Oberon. "Please, your majesty, it is not like that which the Danish elf has just told, only his one reminded me of mine," answered the Fae. "What is it about?" enquired the Queen, who remembered how much she had liked the dainty little creature's first tale. "It is a story showing how that which is ugly may become beautiful through love," readily responded the French Fae. "Let us hear it," said Oberon, "if my Titania wishes it." Titania, having answered that she certainly did wish it, the Fae sprang lightly to the stool and began telling the pretty little love story of Riquet with the Tuft. End of section 31. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 32 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Riquet with the Tuft. Once upon a time, there was a queen who had a son, so ugly and misshapen that it was doubted for a long time whether his form was really human. A fairy who was present at his birth affirmed, nevertheless, that he would be worthy to be loved, as he would have an excellent wit. She added, moreover, that by virtue of the gift she had bestowed upon him, he would be able to impart equal intelligence to the one whom he loved best. All this was some consolation to the poor queen, who was much distressed at having brought so ugly a little monkey into the world. It is true that the child was no sooner able to speak than he said 1,000 pretty things, and that in all his ways there was a certain air of intelligence with which everyone was charmed. Oh, I had forgotten to say that he was born with a little tuft of hair on his head, and so he came to be called Riquet with the Tuft, for Riquet was the family name. About 7 or 8 years later, the queen of a neighboring kingdom had 2 daughters. The elder was fairer than the day, and the queen was so delighted that it was feared some harm might come to her from her great joy. The same fairy who had assisted at the birth of little Riquet was present upon this occasion, and in order to moderate the joy of the queen, she told her that this little princess would have no gifts of mind at all, and that she would be as stupid as she was beautiful. The queen was greatly mortified on hearing this, but shortly after she was even more annoyed when her second little daughter was born and proved to be extremely ugly. "Do not distress yourself, madame," said the fairy to her. "Your daughter will find compensation, for she will have so much intelligence that her lack of beauty will scarcely be perceived." "Heaven send it may be so," replied the queen, "but are there no means whereby a little more understanding might be given to the elder, who is so lovely?" "I can do nothing for her in the way of intelligence, madame," said the fairy, "but everything in the way of beauty. As, however,
There is nothing in my power I would not do to give you comfort. I will bestow on her the power of conferring beauty on any man or woman who shall please her. As these two princesses grew up, their endowments also became more perfect, and nothing was talked of anywhere but the beauty of the elder and the intelligence of the younger. It is true that their defects also greatly increased with their years. The younger became uglier every moment, and the elder more stupid every day. She either made no answer when she was spoken to, or else said something foolish. With this, she was so clumsy that she could not even place 4 pieces of china on a mantel shelf without breaking one of them, or drink a glass of water without spilling half of it on her dress. Notwithstanding the attraction of beauty, the younger, in whatever society they might be, nearly always bore away the palm from her sister. At first, everyone went up to the more beautiful to gaze at and admire her, but they soon left her for the cleverer one, to listen to her many pleasant and amusing sayings. And people were astonished to find that in less than a quarter of an hour the elder had not a soul near her, while all the company had gathered round the younger. The elder, though very stupid, noticed this, and would have given, without regret, all her beauty for half the sense of her sister. Discreet as she was, the queen could not help often reproaching her with her stupidity, which made the poor princess ready to die of grief. One day, when she had gone by herself into a wood to weep over her misfortune, she saw approaching her a little man of very ugly and unpleasant appearance, but magnificently dressed. It was the young Prince Riquet with the Tuft, who, having fallen in love with her from seeing her portraits, which were sent all over the world, had left his father's kingdom that he might have the pleasure of beholding her and speaking to her. Enchanted at meeting her thus alone, he addressed her with all the respect and politeness imaginable. Having remarked, after paying her the usual compliment, that she was very melancholy, he said to her, "I cannot understand, madam, how a person so beautiful as you are can be so unhappy as you appear. For although I can boast of having seen an infinite number of beautiful people, I can say with truth that I have never seen one whose beauty could be compared with yours." "You are pleased to say so, sir," replied the princess, and there she stopped. "Beauty," continued Riquet, "is so great an advantage that it ought to take the place of every other, and, possessed of it, I see nothing that can have power to afflict one." "I would rather," said the princess, "be as ugly as you are, and have intelligence than possess the beauty I do, and be so stupid as I am." "There is no greater proof of intelligence, madame, than the belief that we have it not. It is the nature of that gift that the more we have, the more we believe ourselves to be without it.
I do not know how that may be, said the princess, but I know well enough that I am very stupid, and that is the cause of the grief that is killing me.
If that is all that troubles you, madame, I can easily put an end to your sorrow.
And how would you do that? Said the princess.
I have the power, madame, said Riquet with the Tuft, to give as much intelligence as it is possible to possess to the person whom I love best. As you, madame, are that person, it will depend entirely upon yourself whether or not you become gifted with this amount of intelligence, provided that you are willing to marry me.
The princess was struck dumb with astonishment, and replied not a word.
I see, said Riquet with the Tuft, that this proposal troubles you, and I am not surprised, but I will give you a full year to consider it.
The princess had so little sense, and at the same time was so anxious to have a great deal, that she thought the end of that year would never come. So she at once accepted the offer that was made her. Had no sooner promised Riquet with the Tuft that she would marry him that day 12 months, than she felt herself quite another person. She found she was able to say whatever she pleased, with a readiness past belief, and of saying it in a clever but easy and natural manner. She immediately began a sprightly and well-sustained conversation with Riquet with the Tuft, and was so brilliant in her talk that Riquet with the Tuft began to think he had given her more wit than he had reserved for himself. On her return to the palace, the whole court was puzzled to account for a change so sudden and extraordinary, for the number of foolish things which they had been accustomed to hear from her. She now made as many sensible and exceedingly witty remarks. All the court was in a state of joy not to be described. The younger sister alone was not altogether pleased, for having lost her superiority over her sister in the way of intelligence, she now only appeared by her side as a very unpleasing-looking person. The king now began to be guided by his elder daughter's advice, and at times even held his counsel in her apartment. The news of the change of affairs was spread abroad, and all the young princes of the neighboring kingdoms exerted themselves to gain her affection, and nearly all of them asked her hand in marriage. She found none of them, however, intelligent enough to please her, and she listened to all of them without engaging herself to one. At length arrived a prince so rich and powerful, so clever and so handsome, that she could not help listening willingly to his addresses. Her father, having perceived this, told her that he left her at perfect liberty to choose a husband for herself, and that she had only to make known her decision. As the more intelligence we possess, the more difficulty we find in making up our mind on such a matter as this. She begged her father, after having thanked him, to allow her time to think about it. She went by chance to walk in the same wood in which she had met Riquet with the Tuft, in order to meditate more uninterruptedly over what she had to do. While she was walking, deep in thought, she heard a dull sound beneath her feet, as of many persons running to and fro, and busily occupied. Having listened more attentively, she heard one say, "Bring me that saucepan." Another, "Give me that kettle." Another, "Put some wood on the fire." At the same moment, the ground opened, and she saw beneath her what appeared to be a large kitchen full of cooks, scullions, and all sorts of servants necessary for the preparation of a magnificent banquet. There came forth a band of about 20 to 30 cooks, who went and established themselves in an avenue of the wood, at a very long table, and who, each with the larding pin in his hand and the tail of his fur cap over his ear, set to work, keeping time to a harmonious song. The princess, astonished at this sight, asked the men for whom they were working. "Madame," replied the chief among them, "for Prince Riquet with the Tuft, whose marriage will take place tomorrow." The princess, still more surprised than she was before, and suddenly recollecting that it was just a 12-month from the day on which she had promised to marry Prince Riquet with the Tuft, was overcome with trouble and amazement. The reason of her not having remembered her promise was that when she made it, she had been a very foolish person, and when she became gifted with the new mind that the prince had given her, she had forgotten all her follies. She had not taken another 30 steps when Riquet with the Tuft presented himself before her, gaily and splendidly attired like a prince about to be married. "You see, madame," said he, "I keep my word punctually, and I doubt not that you have come thither to keep yours, and to make me, by the giving of your hand, the happiest of men." "I confess to you frankly," answered the princess, "that I have not yet made up my mind on that matter, and that I do not think I shall ever be able to do so in the way you wish." "You astonish me, madame," said Riquet with the Tuft. "I have no doubt I do," said the princess, "and assuredly, had I to deal with a stupid person, with a man without intelligence, I should feel greatly perplexed. A princess is bound by her word, he would say to me, and you must marry me as you have promised to do so. But as the person to whom I speak is, of all men in the world, the one of greatest sense and understanding, I am certain he will listen to reason. You know that, when I was no better than a fool, I nevertheless could not decide to marry you. How can you expect, now that I have the mind which you have given me, and which renders me much more difficult to please than before, that I should take today a resolution which I could not then? If you seriously thought of marrying me, you did very wrong to take away my stupidity, and so enable me to see more clearly than I saw then. If a man without intelligence, replied Riquet with the Tuft, who reproached you with your breach of promise, might have a right, as you have just intimated, to be treated with indulgence. Why would you, madam, that I should receive less consideration in a matter which affects the entire happiness of my life? Is it reasonable that persons of intellect should be in a worse position than those that have none? Can you assert this, you who have so much, and who so earnestly desired to possess it? But let us come to the point, if you please. Setting aside my ugliness, is there anything in me that displeases you? Are you dissatisfied with my birth, my understanding, my temper, or my manners? Not in the least, replied the princess. I admire in you everything you have mentioned. If that is so, rejoined Riquet with the Tuft, I shall soon be happy, as you have it in your power to make me the most pleasing-looking of men. How can that be done? asked the princess. It can be done, said Riquet with the Tuft, if you love me sufficiently to wish that it should be. And in order, madame, that you should have no doubt about it, know that the same fairy who on the day I was born endowed me with the power to give intelligence to the person I chose, gave you also the power to render handsome the man you should love, and on whom you should wish to bestow this favour. If such be the fact, said the princess, I wish with all my heart that you should become the handsomest and most lovable prince in the world, and I bestow the gift on you to the fullest extent in my power. The princess had no sooner pronounced these words than Riquet with the Tuft appeared to her eyes, of all men in the world, the handsomest, the best made, and most attractive she had ever seen. There are some who assert that it was not the spell of the fairy, but love alone that caused the metamorphosis. They say that the princess, having reflected on the perseverance of her lover, on his prudence, and on all the good quality of his heart and mind, no longer saw the deformity of his body or the ugliness of his features, that his arm appeared to her nothing more than a good-natured shrug of his shoulders, and that instead of noticing, as she had done, how badly he limped, she saw in him only a certain lounging air which charmed her. They say also that his eyes, which squinted, only seemed to her the more brilliant for this, and that the crookedness of his glance was to her merely expressive of his great love. And finally, that his great red nose had in it, to her mind, something martial and heroic. However this may be, the princess promised on the spot to marry him, provided he obtained the consent of the king her father. The king, having learned that his daughter entertained a great regard for Riquet with the Tuft, whom he knew also to be a very clever and wise prince, received him with pleasure as his son-in-law,
The wedding took place the next morning, as Riquet with the Tuft had foreseen, and according to the orders which he had given a long time before. No beauty, no talent, as power above, some indefinite charm, discerned only by love. That is delightful, but it is much too short, said Titania smilingly. Better too short than too long, answered Oberon. But perhaps the pretty little storyteller has another one for us. If your majesties wish it, replied the dainty creature. Let it be a longer one this time, said Titania, and let it be another tale of true love, please. The French fay considered for a moment, and then said, as if to herself, I do know another story of true love, rewarded after strange adventures, but I'm afraid it will be too long for His Majesty's taste. This one is for me, said Titania, turning smilingly to the king, and my Oberon need not listen if he does not wish to. Be it as my queen wishes, said Oberon, who was really excited by the promise of hearing of strange adventures. Then there was a sort of dainty rustling as of the breeze toying with the summer leaves, while all the fairies about the circle settled comfortably down to listen to the long story which the French fay named The Benevolent Frog. End of section 32. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 33 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Benevolent Frog, Part 1. There was once a king who, for many years, had been engaged in a war with his neighbours. A great number of battles had been fought, and at last the enemy laid siege to his capital. The king, fearing for the safety of the queen, begged her to retire to a fortified castle, which he himself had never visited but once. The queen endeavoured with many prayers and tears to persuade him to allow her to remain beside him and to share his fate. And it was with loud cries of grief that she was put into her chariot by the king to be driven away. He ordered his guards, however, to accompany her, and promised to steal away when possible to visit her. He tried to comfort her with this hope, although he knew that there was little chance of fulfilling it. For the castle stood a long distance off, surrounded by a thick forest, and only those who were well acquainted with the roads could possibly find their way to it. The queen parted from her husband, broken-hearted at leaving him exposed to the dangers of war. She travelled by easy stages, in case the fatigue of so long a journey should make her ill. At last she reached the castle, feeling low-spirited and distressed. When sufficiently rested, she walked about the surrounding country, but found nothing to interest her or divert her thoughts. She saw only far-spreading desert tracts on either side,
which gave her more pain than pleasure to look upon. Sadly, she gazed around her, exclaiming at intervals, "What a contrast between this place and that in which I have lived all my life! If I stay here long, I shall die. To whom have I to talk in these solitudes? With whom can I share my troubles? What have I done to the king, that he should banish me? He wishes me, it seems, to feel the full bitterness of our separation by exiling me to this miserable castle." Thus she lamented, and although the king wrote daily to her and sent her good news of the progress of the siege, she grew more and more unhappy, and at last determined that she would return to him, knowing, however, that the officers who were in attendance upon her had received orders not to take her back, unless the king sent a special messenger. She kept her design secret, but ordered a small chariot to be built for her, in which there was only room for one, saying that she should like sometimes to accompany the hunt. She drove herself, and followed so closely on the hounds that the huntsmen were left behind. By this means she had sole command of her chariot, and could get away whenever she liked. Her only difficulty was her ignorance of the roads that traversed the forest, but she trusted to the kindness of Providence to bring her safely through it. She gave word that there was to be a great hunt, and that she wished everybody to be there. She herself would go in her chariot, and each was to follow a different route, that there might be no possibility of escape for the wild beasts. Everything was done according to her orders. The young queen, feeling sure that she should soon see her husband again, dressed herself as becomingly as possible. Her hat was covered with feathers of different colors, the front of her dress lavishly trimmed with precious stones, and her beauty, which was of no ordinary kind, made her seem, when so adorned, a second Diana. While everybody was occupied with the pleasures of the hunt, she gave rein to her horses, encouraged them with voice and whip, and soon their quickened pace became a gallop. Then, taking the bit between their teeth, they flew along at such a speed that the chariot seemed borne by the winds, and the eye could scarcely follow it. Too late, the poor queen repented of her rashness. "What could I have been thinking of?" she said. "How could I have imagined that I should be able to control such wild and fiery horses? Alas, what will become of me? What would the king do if he knew the great danger I am in? He who loves me so dearly, and who only sent me away that I might be in greater safety. This is my gratitude for his tender care." The air resounded with her piteous lamentation. She invoked heaven, she called the fairies to her assistance. But it seemed that all the powers had abandoned her. The chariot was overthrown. She had not sufficient strength to jump quickly enough to the ground, and her foot
was caught between the wheel and the axle tree. It was only by a miracle she was saved. She remained stretched on the ground at the foot of a tree. Her heart scarcely beat. She could not speak, and her face was covered with blood. She lay thus for a long time. When at last she opened her eyes, she saw standing near her a woman of gigantic stature, clothed only in a lion's skin, with bare arms and legs, her hair tied up with the dried skin of a snake, the head of which dangled over her shoulders. In her hand was a club made of stone, which served her as a walking stick, and a quiver full of arrows was fastened to her side. When the queen caught sight of this extraordinary figure, she felt sure that she was dead, for she did not think it was possible that she could be alive after such a terrible accident. And she said in a low voice to herself, "I am not surprised that it is so difficult to resolve to die, since what is to be seen in the other world is so frightful." The giantess, who overheard her words, could not help laughing at the queen's idea that she was dead. "Take courage," she said to her, "for know that you are still among the living, but your fate is none the less sad. I am the fairy lioness whose dwelling is near here. You must come and live with me." The queen looked sorrowfully at her and said, "If you will be good enough, Madame Lioness, to take me back to my castle and tell the king what ransom you demand, he loves me so dearly that he will not refuse you even the half of his kingdom." "No," replied the giantess, "I am rich enough, but for some time past my lonely life has seemed dull to me. You are intelligent and will be able, perhaps, to amuse me." As she finished speaking, she took the form of a lioness, and placing the queen on her back, she carried her to the depths of her cave, and there rubbed her with a spirit which quickly healed the queen's wounds. But what surprise and misery for the queen to find herself in this dreadful abode! It was only reached by 10,000 steps, which led down to the centre of the earth. There was no light but that shed by a number of tall lamps, which were reflected in a lake of quicksilver. This lake was covered with monsters, each hideous enough to have frightened a less timid queen. There were owls, screech owls, ravens, and other birds of ill omen, filling the air with discordant sounds. In the distance could be seen rising a mountain, whence flowed the sluggish waters of a stream composed of all the tears shed by unhappy lovers from the reservoirs of their sad loves. The trees were bare of leaves and fruit, the ground covered with marigolds, briars, and nettles. The food corresponded to the climate of this miserable country. For a few dried roots, some horse chestnuts,
and sawn apples were all that was provided by the fairy lioness to appease the hunger of those who fell into her hands. As soon as the queen was well enough to begin work, the fairy told her she could build herself a hut, as she was going to remain with her for the rest of her life. On hearing this, the queen could no longer restrain her tears. "Alas, what have I done to you," she cried, "that you should keep me here? If my death, which I feel is near, would give you pleasure, I pray you, kill me. It is all the kindness I dare hope from you. But do not condemn me to pass a long and melancholy life apart from my husband." The lioness only scoffed at her and told her that the best thing she could do was to dry her tears and try to please her, that if she acted otherwise, she would be the most miserable person in the world. "What must I do then," replied the queen, "to soften your heart?" "I am fond of fly pasties," said the lioness. "You must find means of procuring a sufficient number of flies to make me a large and sweet-tasting one." "But," said the queen, "I see no flies here, and even were there any, it is not light enough to catch them. And if I were to catch some, I have never in my life made pastry. So you are giving me orders which it is impossible for me to execute." "No matter," said the pitiless lioness, "that which I wish to have, I will have." The queen made no reply. She thought to herself, in spite of the cruel fairy, that she had but one life to lose, and in the condition in which she then was, what was there to fear in death? Instead, therefore, of going in search of flies, she sat herself down under a yew tree and began to weep and complain. "Ah, my dear husband, what grief will be yours when you go to the castle to fetch me, and find I am not there. You will think that I am dead or faceless, and I would rather that you should mourn the loss of my life than that of my love. Perhaps someone will find the remains of my chariot in the forest, and all the ornaments which I took with me to please you. And when you see these, you will no longer doubt that death has taken me. And how can I tell that you will not give to another the heart love which you have shared with me? But at least I shall not have the pain of knowing this, since I am not to return to the world." She would have continued communing thus with herself for a long time, if she had not been interrupted by the dismal croaking of a raven above her head. She lifted her eyes, and by the feeble light saw a large raven with a frog in its bill and about to swallow it. "Although I see no help at hand for myself," she said, "I will not let this poor frog perish if I can save it. It suffers as much in its way as I do in mine, although our conditions are so different." And picking up the first stick she could find, she made the raven drop its prey. The frog fell to the ground where it lay for a time, half stunned. But finally, recovering its froggish senses, it began to speak and said,
Beautiful queen, you are the first benevolent person that I have seen since my curiosity first brought me here.
By what wonderful power are you enabled to speak, little frog? Responded the queen. And what kind of people do you see here? For as yet I have seen none.
All the monsters that cover the lake,
replied the little frog,
were once in the world, some on thrones, some in high positions at court. There are even here some royal ladies who caused much strife and bloodshed. It is they whom you see changed into leeches. Their fate condemns them to be here for a time, but none of those who come return to the world better or wiser.
I can well understand, said the queen, that many wicked people together do not help to make each other better. But you, my little frog friend, what are you doing here?
It was curiosity which led me here,
she replied.
I am half a fairy. My powers are restricted with regard to certain things, but far-reaching in others. If the fairy Leoness knew that I was in her dominions, she would kill me.
Whether fairy or a fairy, said the queen, I cannot understand how you could have fallen into the raven's clutches and been nearly eaten.
I can explain it in a few words,
replied the frog.
When I have my little cap of roses on my head, I fear nothing, as in that resides most of my power. Unfortunately, I had left it in the marsh when that ugly raven pounced upon me. If it had not been for you, madame, I should be no more. And as you have saved my life, you have only to command, and I will do all in my power to alleviate the sorrows of your own.
Alas, dear frog, said the queen, the wicked fairy who holds me captive wishes me to make her a fly pasty. But there are no flies here. If there were any, I could not see in the dim light to catch them. I run a chance, therefore, of being killed by her blows.
Leave it to me, said the frog. I will soon get you some.
Whereupon the frog rubbed herself over with sugar, and more than 6,000 of her frog friends did likewise. Then they repaired to a place where the fairy kept a large store of flies, for the purpose of tormenting some of her unhappy victims. As soon as they smelt the sugar, they flew to it and stuck to the frogs. And these kind helpers returned at a gallop to the queen. There had never been such a fly-catching before, nor a better pasty than that the queen made for the fairy. The latter was greatly surprised when the queen handed it to her, and could not imagine how she had been clever enough to catch the flies. The queen finding herself exposed to the inclemencies of the poisonous atmosphere, cut down some cypress branches wherewith to build herself a hut. The frog generously offered their services, and putting herself at the head of all those who had gone to collect the flies, they helped the queen to build as pretty a little tenement as their wealth could show. Scarcely, however, had she laid herself down to rest, than the monsters of the lake, jealous of her repose, came round her hut, and nearly drove her distracted by setting up a noise more hideous than any ever heard before. She rose in fear and trembling, and fled from the house. This was exactly what the monsters desired. A dragon, who had formerly been a tyrant of one of the finest states of the universe, immediately took possession of it. The poor queen tried to complain of the ill treatment, but no one would listen to her. The monsters laughed and hooted at her, and the fairy lioness told her that if she came again to deafen her with lamentation, she would give her a sound thrashing. She was forced, therefore, to hold her tongue, and to have recourse to the frog, who was the kindest body in the world. They wept together, for as soon as she put on her cap of roses, the frog was able to laugh or weep like anyone else.
I feel such an affection for you,
she said to the queen,
that I will rebuild your house, even though I drive all the monsters of the lake to despair.
She immediately cut some wood, and the little rustic palace of the queen was so quickly reared that she was able to sleep in it that night. The frog, who thought of everything that was necessary for the queen's comfort, made her a bed of wild thyme. When the wicked fairy found out that the queen did not sleep on the ground, she said for her,
"What gods or men are they who protect you?"
she asked.
"This land, watered only by showers of burning sulphur, has never produced even a leaf of sage. I am told, nevertheless, that sweet-smelling herbs spring up beneath your feet."
"I cannot explain it, madame," said the queen, "unless the cause is due to the child I hope one day to have, who will perhaps be less unhappy than I am."
"What I now wish for," said the fairy, "is a bunch of the rarest flowers. See if this coming happiness you speak of will obtain these for you. If you fail to get them, blows will not fail to follow, for these I often give, and know well how to administer."
The queen began to cry. Such threats as these were anything but pleasant to her. She was in despair at the thought of the impossibility of finding flowers. She went back to her little house. Her friend the frog came to her.
"How unhappy you are,"
she said to the queen. "Alas, who would not be so, dear friend? The fairy has ordered a bunch of the most beautiful flowers. And where am I to find them? You see what sort of flowers grow here. My life, nevertheless, is at stake if I do not procure them for her."
"Dear queen,"
said the frog in tender tones,
We must try our best to get you out of this difficulty. There lives a bat in this neighborhood, the only one with whom I have made acquaintance. She is a good creature and moves more quickly than I can. I will give her my cap of roses, and aided by this, she will be able to find you the flowers.
The queen made a low curtsy, for there was no possible way of embracing the frog. The latter went off without delay to speak to the bat. A few hours later, she returned, bearing under her wings the most exquisite flowers. The queen hurried off with them to the fairy, who was more overcome by surprise than before, unable to understand in what miraculous way the queen received help. Meanwhile, the queen was continually thinking by what means she could escape. She confided her longing to the frog, who said to her,
Madame, allow me first to consult my little cap, and we will then arrange matters according to its advice.
She took her cap, placed it on some straw, and then burned in front of it a few sprigs of juniper, some capers, and 2 green peas. She then croaked 5 times, and the ceremony being completed, put on her cap again, and began speaking like an oracle.
Fate, the ruler of all things, forbids you to leave this place. You will have a little princess, more beautiful than Venus herself. Do not trouble yourself about anything else. Time alone can comfort you.
The queen's head drooped. A few tears fell from her eyes, but she resolved to trust her friend. At least, she said to her, do not leave me here alone, and befriend me when my little one is born. The frog promised to remain with her, and comforted her as best she could. End of section 33. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 34 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Benevolent Frog, Part 2. But it is now time to return to the king. While the enemy kept him shut up in his capital, he could not continually send messengers to the queen. At last, however, after several sorties, he obliged the besiegers to retire, and he rejoiced at his success less on his own account than on that of the queen, whom he could now bring back in safety. He was in total ignorance of the disaster which had befallen her, for none of his officers had dared to tell him of it. They had been into the forest and found the remains of the chariot, the runaway horses, and the driving apparel which she had put on when going to find her husband. As they were fully persuaded that she was dead and had been eaten by wild beasts, their only care was to make the king believe that she had died suddenly. On receiving this mournful intelligence, he thought he should die of grief. He tore his hair, he wept many tears, and gave vent to his bereavement in every imaginable expression of sorrow, cries, sobs, and sighs. For some days he would see no one, nor allow himself to be seen. He then returned to his capital and entered on a long period of mourning, to which the sorrow of his heart testified more sincerely than even his sombre garments of grief. All the surrounding kings sent their ambassadors charged with messages of condolence, and when the ceremonies indispensable to these occasions were over, he granted his subjects a period of peace, exempting them from military service and helping them in every possible way to improve their commerce. The queen knew nothing of all this. Meanwhile, a little princess had been born to her, as beautiful as the frog had predicted, to whom they gave the name of Muffet. The queen had great difficulty in persuading the fairy to allow her to bring up the child, for so ferocious was she that she would have liked to eat it. Muffet, a wonder of beauty, was now 6 months old. The queen, as she looked upon her with a tenderness mingled with pity, continually said, "Ah, if your father could see you, my poor little one, how delighted he would be, how dear you would be to him. But even already maybe he has begun to forget me. He believes no doubt that we are lost to him in death, and perhaps another fills the place in his heart that once was mine." These sorrowful reflections caused her many tears. The frog, who truly loved her, seeing her cry like this, said to her one day, "If you would like me to do so, madame, I will go and find the king, your husband. The journey is long, and I travel but slowly, but sooner or later I shall hope to arrive." This proposal could not have been more warmly received than it was. The queen clasped her hands and made Muffet clasp her too, in sign of the gratitude she felt towards Madame Frog for offering to undertake the journey. She assured her that the king also would not be ungrateful. But, she continued, of what use would it be to him to know that I am in this melancholy abode? It will be impossible for him to deliver me from it. "Madame," replied the frog, "we must leave that to Heaven. We can only do that which depends on ourselves." They said goodbye to one another. The queen sent a message to the king, written with her blood, on a piece of rag, for she possessed neither ink nor paper. She begged him to give attention to everything the good frog told him, and to believe all she said, as she was bringing him news of herself. The frog was a year and 4 days climbing up the 10,000 steps which lead from the dark country in which he had left the queen up into the world. It took her another year to prepare her equipage, for she had too much pride to allow herself to appear at the court like a poor common frog from the marshes. She had a little sedan chair made, large enough to hold 2 eggs comfortably. It was covered on the outside with tortoiseshell, and lined with lizard skin. Then she chose
50 maids of honor. These were the little green frogs which up about in the meadows. Each was mounted on a snail, furnished with a light saddle, and rode in style with the legs thrown over the saddle bow. Several water rats, dressed as pages, ran before the snails, as their bodyguard. In short, nothing so pretty had ever been seen before, and to crown it all, her cap of crimson roses, always fresh and in full bloom, suited her in the most admirable manner. She was a bit of a coquette in her way, so she felt obliged to add a little rouge and a few patches. Some said that she was painted as were many ladies of that country, but inquiries into the matter proved that this report had only been spread by her enemies. The journey lasted 7 years, during which time the poor queen went through unspeakable pains and suffering, and if it had not been for the beautiful Moufette, who was a great comfort to her, she would have died 100 times over. This wonderful little creature could not open her mouth or say a word without filling her mother with delight. Indeed, everybody, with the exception of the fairy Lyonesse, was enchanted with her. At last, when the queen had lived 6 years in this horrible place, the fairy said that, provided everything she killed was given to her, she might go hunting with her. The joy of the queen at once more seeing the sun may be imagined. So unaccustomed had she grown to its light, that at first she thought it would blind her. As for Moufette, she was so quick and intelligent that even at 5 or 6 years of age, she never failed to hit her mark, and so, in this way, the mother and daughter succeeded in somewhat lessening the ferocity of the fairy. The frog travelled over mountains and valleys, never stopping day or night. At last she drew near the capital, where the king was in residence. She was surprised to see dancing and festivity in every direction. There was laughter and singing, and the nearer she got to the town, the more joyous and jubilant the people seemed. Her equipage caused great astonishment. Everyone went after it, and so large had the crowd become by the time she had reached the town, that she had great difficulty in making her way to the palace. Here everything was as magnificent as possible, for the king, who had been a widower for 9 years, had at last yielded to the praise of his subjects, and was on the eve of marriage with a princess, less beautiful, it is true, than his wife, but not the less agreeable for that. The kind frog, having descended from her sedan chair, entered the royal presence, followed by her attendants. She had no need to ask for audience, for the king, his affianced bride, and all the princes were all much too curious to know the reason of her coming, to think of interrupting her.
Sire,
Said she,
I hardly know if the news I bring you will give you joy or sorrow. The marriage which you are about to celebrate convinces me of your infidelity to the queen.
her memory is dear to me as ever, said the king, unable to prevent the falling of a tear or two.
But you must know, kind frog, that kings are not always able to do what they wish. For the last 9 years, my subjects have been urging me to marry. I owe them an heir to the throne, and I have therefore chosen this young princess, who appears to me all that is charming. I advise you not to marry her, for the queen is not dead. I bring you a letter from her, written in her own blood. A little daughter Buffet has been born to you, more beautiful than the heavens themselves.
The king took the rag on which the queen had scrawled a few words. He kissed it. He bathed it in his tears. He showed it to the whole assembly, saying that he recognized his wife's handwriting. He asked the frog 1,000 questions, which she answered with vivacity and intelligence.
The betrothed princess and the ambassadors who had come to be present at the marriage began to pull long faces. One of the most important of the guests turned to the king and said, "Sire, can you think of breaking so solemn an engagement on their word of a toad like that? This scum of the marshes has the insolence to come and tell lies before the whole court for the pleasure of being heard."
"No, your excellency," replied the frog,
"that I am no scum of the marshes, and since I am forced to exhibit my powers, come forth, fairies all!"
And thereupon all the frogs, rats, snails, lizards, with a frog at their head, suddenly appeared, not, however, in the usual form of these reptiles, but with tall, majestic figures, pleasing countenances, and eyes more brilliant than stars. Each wore a jeweled crown on his head, and over his shoulders a regal mantle of velvet, lined with ermine, with a long train which was borne by dwarfs. At the same time was heard the sound of trumpets, kettle drums, hautboys, and drums, filling the air with melodious and warlike music, and all the fairies began to dance a ballet, their every step so light that the slightest spring lifted them to the vaulted ceiling of the room. The king and his future queen, surprised as they were at this, were no less astonished when they saw all these fairy ballet dancers suddenly change into flowers. Jasmine, jonquille, violet, pinks, and tuberoses, which still continued to dance as if they had legs and feet. It was like a living flower bed, of which every movement delighted both the eye and the sense of smell. Another moment, and the flowers had disappeared, and in their place several fountains threw their waters into the air and fell into an artificial lake at the foot of the castle walls. This was covered with little painted and gilded boats, so pretty and dainty that the princess invited the ambassadors to go for a trip on the water. They were all pleased to do so, thinking it was all a merry pastime which would end happily in the marriage festivities. But they had no sooner embarked than the boats, water, and fountains disappeared, and their frogs were frogs again. The king asked what had become of the princess. The frog replied,
Sire, no queen is yours, but your wife. Were I less attached to her than I am, I should not interfere. But she is so deserving, and your daughter Moffat is so charming that you ought not to delay a moment in going to their deliverance.
I assure you, Madame Frog, said the king, that if I did not believe my wife to be dead, there is nothing in the world I would not do to see her again.
After the wonders I have shown you,
She replied,
it seems to me that you ought to be more convinced of the truth of what I have told you. Leave your kingdom in charge of trustworthy men and start without delay. Here is a ring which will furnish you with the means of seeing the queen and of speaking with the fairy Leoness, although she is the most terrible creature in the world.
the king departed, refusing to have anyone accompany him. After making handsome presents to the frog,
Do not be discouraged,
she said to him,
you will meet with terrible difficulties, but I hope that you will succeed according to your wishes.
Somewhat comforted by her words, the king started in search of his dear wife, with no other guide than his ring. As Moffat grew older, her beauty became more perfect, and all the monsters of the Quicksilver Lake fell in love with her, and the dragons with their hideous and terrifying forms came and lay at her feet. Although Moffat had seen them ever since she was born, her beautiful eyes could not accustom themselves to the sight of these creatures, and she would run away and hide in her mother's arms. "Shall we remain here long?" she asked her. "Is there to be no end to our misery?" The queen spoke hopefully in order to cheer her child, but in her heart she had no hope. The absence of the frog, her unbroken silence, the long time that had elapsed since she had news of the king, all these things filled her with sorrow and despair. The fairy lioness had gradually made it a practice to take them with her hunting. She was fond of good things, and liked the game they killed for her. And although all they got in return was the gift of the head or the feet, it was something to be allowed to see again the light of day. The fairy took the form of a lioness. The queen and her daughter seated themselves on her back, and thus they went hunting through the forests. The king happened to be resting in a forest one day, whither his ring had guided him, and saw them pass like an arrow shot from the bow. He was unseen of them, and when he tried to follow them, they vanished completely from his sight. Notwithstanding the constant trouble she had been in, the queen still preserved her former beauty. She appeared to her husband more charming than ever. He longed for her to return to him, and feeling sure that the young princess who was with her was his dear little Moffat, he determined to face 1,000 deaths rather than abandon his design of rescuing her. By the help of his ring, he found his way into the obscure region where the queen had been so many years. He was not a little surprised when he found himself descending to the center of the earth. But every fresh thing he saw astonished him more and more. The very lioness, who knew everything, was aware of the day and the hour when he would arrive. She would have given a great deal if the powers in league with her had ordained otherwise, but she determined at least to oppose his strength with the full might of her own. She built a palace of crystal, which floated in the centre of the lake of quicksilver, and rose and fell with its waves. In it she imprisoned the queen and her daughter, and then harangued all the monsters who were in love with Moffat.
"You will lose this beautiful princess,"
she said to them,
"if you do not help me to protect her from a knight who has come to carry her away."
The monsters promised to leave nothing in their power undone. They surrounded the palace of crystal, the lightest in weight, took their stations on the roof and the walls. The others kept guard at the doors, and the remainder in the lake. The king, advised by his faithful ring, went first to the fairies' cave. She was awaiting him in her form of lioness. As soon as he appeared, she threw herself upon him, but he handled his sword with a valor for which she was not prepared, and as she was putting out one of her paws to fell him to the earth, he cut it off at the joint, just where the elbow comes. She uttered a loud cry and fell over. He went up to her, put his foot on her throat, and swore that he would kill her. And, in spite of her ungovernable fury and invulnerability, she felt a little afraid.
"What do you wish to do with me?" she asked. "What do you want of me?"
"I wish to punish you," he replied proudly, "for having carried away my wife, and you shall give her up to me, or I will strangle you on the spot."
"Look towards the lake,"
she said, "and see if I have the power to do so." The king turned in the direction towards which she pointed, and saw the queen and her daughter in the palace of crystal, which was floating like a vessel without oars or rudder on the lake of quicksilver. He was ready to die with mingled joy and sorrow. He called to them with all his might, and they heard him. But how was he to reach them? While thinking over the means by which he might accomplish this, the fairy lioness disappeared. He ran round and round the lake, but whenever the palace came close enough to him, on one side or the other, for him to spring upon it suddenly floated away again with terrible swiftness, and so his hopes were continually disappointed. The queen, fearing he would at length grow weary, called to him not to lose courage, that the fairy lioness wanted to tire him out, but that true love knew how to face all difficulties. She and Moffat then stretched out their hands towards him, with imploring gestures. Seeing this, the king was filled with renewed courage, and raising his voice, he said that he would rather pass the remainder of his life in this melancholy region than go away without them. He needed great patience, for no king on earth ever spent such a wretched time before. He had only the ground covered with briars and thorns for his bed. His food consisted of wild fruits more bitter than gall, and he was incessantly engaged in defending himself from the monsters of the lake. End of section 34. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 35 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Benevolent Frog. Part 3. 3 years passed in this manner, and the king could not flatter himself that he had gained the least advantage. He was almost in despair, and over again was tempted to throw himself in the lake, and he would certainly have done so if he could have thought that by such a deed he might alleviate the sufferings of the queen and the princess. He was running one day, as usual, first to one side of the lake, then to the other, when one of the most hideous of the dragons called him and said to him, "If you will swear to me by your crown and sceptre, by your royal mantle, by your wife and child, to give me, whenever I shall ask for it, a certain delicate morsel to eat, for which I have a taste, I will take you on my back, and I promise you that none of the monsters of this lake who guard the palace shall prevent us from carrying off the queen and Princess Moufette." "Ah, my beloved dragon," cried the king, "I swear to you and to all the family of dragons that I will give you your fill to eat of what you like, and will forever remain your humble servant." "Do not make any promises," replied the dragon, "if you have any thought of not fulfilling them, for in that case misfortunes will fall upon you that you will not forget as long as you live." The king renewed his protestations. He was dying of impatience to get possession of his dear queen. He mounted on the dragon's back as if it was the finest horse in the world. But the other monsters now advanced to bar his passage. They fought together. Nothing was to be heard but the sharp hissings of the serpents. Nothing to be seen but fire and sulphur and saltpeter falling in every direction. At last the king reached the palace, but here his efforts had to be renewed, for the entrances were defended by bats, owls, and ravens. However, the dragon, with his claws, his teeth, and tail, cut to pieces even the boldest of these. The queen, on her side, who was looking on at this fierce encounter, kicked away pieces of the wall and armed herself with these to help her dear husband. They were at last victorious. They ran into one another's arms, and the work of disenchantment was completed by a thunderbolt, which fell into the lake and dried it up. The friendly dragon had disappeared with all the other monsters, and the king, by what means he could not guess, found himself again in his own capital, seated with his queen and Moufette in a magnificent dining hall, with a table spread with exquisite meats in front of them. Such joy and astonishment as theirs were unknown before. All their subjects ran in to see the queen and the young princess, who, to add to the wonder of it all, was so superbly dressed that the eye could hardly bear to look upon her dazzling jewels. It is easy to imagine the festivities that now went on at the castle. Masquerades, running at the ring, and tournaments attracted the greatest princes in the world. But even more were they attracted by the bright eyes of Moufette. Among those who were the handsomest and most accomplished in the feats of arms, Prince Moufie everywhere was the most conspicuous. He was universally admired and applauded, and Moufette, who hitherto had been only in the company of dragons and serpents, did not withhold her share of praise. No day passed, but Prince Moufie showed her some fresh attention in the hope of pleasing her, for he loved her deeply, and having offered himself as a suitor, he made known to the king and queen that his principality was of a beauty and extent that deserved their special attention. The king replied that Moufette was at liberty to choose a husband, and that he only wished to please her and make her happy. The prince was delighted with this answer, and having already become aware that he was not indifferent to the princess, offered her his hand. She assured him that if he was not her husband, no other man should be, and Moufie, overcome with joy, threw himself at her feet, and in affectionate terms begged her to remember the promise she had given him. The prince and princess were betrothed, and Prince Moufie then returned to his principality to make preparations for the marriage. Moufette shed many tears at his departure, for she was troubled with a presentiment of evil which she could not explain. The queen, seeing that the prince was also overcome with sorrow, gave him the portrait of her daughter, and begged him rather to lessen the magnificence of the preparation than to delay his return. The prince, only too ready to obey such a command, promised to comply with what would be for his own happiness. The princess occupied herself during his absence with her music, for she had, in a few months, learned to play well. One day, when she was in the queen's room, the king rushed in, his face bathed in tears, and taking his daughter in his arms. "Alas, my child!" he cried. "Alas, wretched father, unhappy king!" He could say no more, for his voice was stifled with sobs. The queen and princess, in great alarm, asked him what was the matter, and at last he was able to tell them that a giant of enormous height, who gave himself out to be an ambassador from the dragon of the lake, has just arrived, that in accordance with the promise made by the king in return for the help he had received in fighting the monsters, The dragon demanded him to give up the princess, as he wished to make her into a pie for his dinner. The king added that he had bound himself by solemn oaths to give him what he asked, and in those days no one ever broke his word. When the queen heard this dreadful news, she uttered piercing cries and clasped her child to her breast. "My life shall be taken," she said, "before my daughter shall be delivered up to that monster. Let him rather take our kingdom and all that we possess. Unnatural father, can you possibly consent to such a cruel thing? What? My child made into a pie? The thought of it is intolerable. Send me this terrible ambassador. Maybe the sight of my anguish may touch his heart." The king made no reply, but went in search of the giant and brought him to the queen, who threw herself at his feet. She and her daughter implored him to have mercy upon them, and to persuade the dragon to take everything they possessed, and to spare Muffet's life. But the giant replied that the matter did not rest with him, and that the dragon was so obstinate and so fond of good things that all the powers combined would not prevent him eating whatever he had taken into his head he would like for a meal. He further advised them, as a friend, to consent with a good grace, as otherwise greater evils might arise. At these words, the queen fainted, and the princess, had she not been obliged to go to her mother's assistance, would have done the same. No sooner was the sad news spread through the palace than the whole town knew it. Nothing was heard but weeping and wailing, for Muffet was greatly beloved. The king could not make up his mind to give her to the giant, and the giant, who had already waited some days, began to grow impatient and to utter terrible threats. The king and queen, however, said to each other, "What worse thing could happen to us? If the dragon of the lake were to come and devour us all, we could not be more distressed. If Muffet is put into a pie, we are lost." The giant now told them that he had received a message from his master, and that if the princess would agree to marry a nephew of his, the dragon would let her live. That the nephew was young and handsome, that moreover he was a prince, and that she would be able to live with him very happily. This proposal somewhat lessened their grief. The queen spoke to the princess, but found her still more averse to this marriage than to the thought of death. "I cannot save my life by being unfaithful," said Muffet. "You promised me to Prince Muffy, and I will marry no one else. Let me die. My death will ensure the peace of your lives." The king then came and endeavored with all the tenderest of expressions to persuade her, but nothing moved her, and finally it was decided that she should be conducted to the summit of a mountain, and there await the dragon. Everything was prepared for this great sacrifice. Nothing so mournful had before been seen, nothing to be met anywhere but black garments and pale and horrified faces. 400 maidens of the highest rank, dressed in long white robes and crowned with cypress, accompanied the princess, who was carried in an open litter of black velvet, that all might look upon this masterpiece of beauty.
her tied with crape hung over her shoulders, and she wore a crown of jasmine, mingled with a few marigolds. The grief of the king and queen who followed, overcome by their deep sorrow, appeared the only thing that moved her. The giant, armed from head to foot, marched beside the litter and looked with hungry eye at the princess, as if anticipating his share of her when she came to be eaten. The air resounded with sighs and sobs, and the road was flooded with the tears of the onlookers. "Ah, frog, frog!" cried the queen, "you have indeed forsaken me. Alas, why did you give me help in that unhappy region, and now withhold it from me? Would that I had then died! I should not now be lamenting the loss of all my hopes. I should not now have the anguish of seeing my dear Moffat on the point of being devoured." The procession, meanwhile, was slowly advancing, and at last reached the summit of the fatal mountain. Here the cries and lamentations were redoubled. Nothing more piteous had before been heard. The giant ordered every one to say farewell and to retire, and they all obeyed him. For in those days, people were very simple and submissive, and never sought for a remedy in their misfortunes. The king and queen and all the court now ascended another mountain, whence they could see all that happened to the princess. And they had not to wait long before they saw a dragon, half a league long, coming through the air. His body was so heavy that, notwithstanding his 6 large wings, he was hardly able to fly. He was covered with immense blue scales and poisonous tongues of flame. His tail was twisted into as many as 50.5 coils. Each of his claws was the size of a windmill, and 3 rows of teeth, as long as those of an elephant, could be seen inside his wide open jaw. As the dragon slowly made his way towards the mountain, the good, faithful frog, mounted on the back of a hawk, flew rapidly to Prince Muffy. She wore her cap of roses, and although he was locked into his private room, she entered without a key, and said,
"Oh, what are you doing here,
"Unhappy lover,
you sit dreaming of Muffet's beauty, and at this very moment she is exposed to the most frightful danger.
here is a rose leaf.
By blowing upon it, I can change it into a superb horse, as you will see."
There immediately appeared a horse, green in colour, and with 12 hooves and 3 heads, of which one emitted fire, another bombshells, and the third cannonballs. She gave the prince a sword 8 yards long and lighter than a feather. She clothed him with a single diamond, which he put on like a coat, and which, although as hard as a rock, was so pliable that he could move in it at his ease.
"Go," she said. "Run, fly to the rescue of her whom you love. The green horse I have given you will take you to her, and when you have delivered her, let her know the share I have had in the matter."
"Generous fairy," cried the prince, "I cannot at this moment show you all my gratitude, but henceforth I am your faithful servitor." He mounted the horse with the 3 heads, which instantly galloped off on its 12 hoofs, and went at a greater rate than 3 of the best ordinary horses, so that in a very little time the prince reached the mountain. When he found his dear princess all alone, and saw the dragon slowly drawing near, the green horse immediately began to send forth fire, bombshells, and cannonballs, which not a little astonished the monster. He received 20 balls in his throat, and his scales were somewhat damaged, and the bombshells put out one of his eyes. He grew furious and made as if to throw himself upon the prince, but Muffy's long sword was so finely tempered that he could use it as he liked, thrusting it in at times up to the hilt, and at others using it like a whip. Still, he would have suffered from the dragon's claws had it not been for his diamond coat, which was impenetrable. Muffet had recognized her lover a long way off, for the diamond that covered him was transparent and bright, and she was seized with mortal terror at the danger he was in. The king and queen, however, were filled with renewed hope, for it was such an unexpected thing to see a horse with 3 heads and 12 hoofs sending forth fire and flame, and the prince in a diamond suit and armed with a formidable sword, arrive at such an opportune moment, and fight with so much valour. The king put his hat on the top of his stick, and the queen tied her handkerchief to the end of another, as signals of encouragement to the prince, and all their court followed suit. As a fact, this was not necessary, for his own hat and the peril in which he saw Muffet were sufficient to animate his courage. And what efforts did he not make? The ground was covered with stings, claws, horns, wings, and scales of the dragon. The earth was coloured blue and green with the mingled blood of the dragon on the horse. 5 times the prince fell to the ground, but each time he rose again and leisurely mounted his horse. And then there was the cannonades and rushing of flames and explosions such as were never heard or seen before. The dragon's strength at last gave way, and he fell. The prince gave him a final blow, and nobody could believe their eyes when from this last great wound there stepped forth a handsome and charming prince in a coat of blue and gold velvet embroidered with pearls, while on his head he wore a little Grecian helmet, shaded with white feathers. He rushed, his arms outspread, towards Prince Muffy and embraced him. "What do I not owe you, valiant liberator?" he cried. "You have delivered me from a worse prison than ever before enclosed a king. I have long wished there since 16 years ago. The fairy lioness condemned me to it, and such was her power that she would have forced me against my will to devour that adorable princess. Lead me to her feet, that I may explain to her my misfortune." Prince Muffy, surprised and delighted at this extraordinary termination to his adventure, showered civilities on the newly found prince. They hastened to rejoin Muffet, who thanked heaven 1,000 times for her unhoped-for happiness. The king, the queen, and all the court were all ready with her, Everybody spoke at once. Nobody listened to anybody else, and they all shed nearly as many tears of joy as they had before of grief. Finally, that nothing might be wanting to complete their rejoicing, the good frog appeared, flying through the air on her ark, which had little bells of gold on its feet. When the tinkle, tinkle of these was heard, everyone looked up and saw the cap of roses shining like the sun, and the frog as beautiful as the dawn. The queen ran towards her and took her by one of her little paws, and in the same moment the wise frog became a great queen with a charming countenance. "I come," she cried, "to crown the faithful mouvette, who preferred to risk her life rather than be untrue to Prince Muffy." She thereupon took 2 myrtle wreaths and placed them on the heads of the lovers, and, giving 3 taps with her wand, all the dragon's bones formed themselves into a triumphal arch in commemoration of the great event which had just taken place. They all wended their way back to the town, singing wedding songs as gaily as they had before mournfully bewailed the sacrifice of the princess. The marriage took place the following day, and the joy with which it was celebrated may be imagined. When the Fae had finished, all were agreed that her story was not a word too long, and all thanked her as she flew back, with daintily fluttering little wings, back to her place. All began wondering what the next story would be like. They did not have to wonder long, for Titania, turning to King Oberon, said, "I have chosen several stories. You choose now."
"I think," said Oberon, "that the Scandinavian dwarf who told us our first tale about Thor and the wicked Loki could perhaps tell us another."
As soon as he spoke, the Scandinavian dwarf came forward, well pleased, of course, at being so honoured, and said,
"I will tell your majesty, then, a further tale of how it was that Thor managed to get the heroes out of a nasty fix into which they had got themselves with a dwarf, who lived in a dark underground place, who had made them promise that he should marry their most beautiful Freya. It is the story," he began, "of the ambition and undoing of Allwise the Dwarf."
End of section 35. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 36 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Allwise the Dwarf.
Allwise the Dwarf, once by his cunning wiles entrapped the heroes into a promise that they would give him the beautiful Freya for his wife, and he set out from his cavern home for Asgard, that he might claim fulfillment of the promise. Before leaving, he gave orders to his servant dwarfs that they should deck the place against his return with the bride. Now the heroes of Asgard, finding that they had been tricked into making a promise which they did not intend, marvelled how they might spare themselves the fulfilling of it. Thor at length suggested that as Allwise would visit Asgard by night, and as he could not bear the sunlight, they should keep him engaged in talk until the sun rose. And what is more, he offered to do this himself. And so when the dwarf reached the city of the heroes, it was Thor whom he first encountered, and who hailed him thus:
What fellow art thou? Why art thou as pale as if thou hadst come from among the dead? Surely thou art but a sorry bridegroom. Then answered the dwarf, Allwise my name is. I dwell in a cavern beneath the earth, and I am come to fetch my bride, for the heroes will not break their plighted word. I will break it, said Thor firmly, for Freyr is my word, and I was not of those who made the promise to you. It is needful that I should hallow the weddings of the heroes. Who is this fellow, said Allwise the dwarf scornfully, who claims to control the fair beaming maid? Thor is my name, answered the hero wrathfully. I am Longbeard's son. I have travelled far. Without my will thou shalt never have the maid, or make this match. I would rather have thy good will. I would sooner win than want the snow-white maid. The maiden's love shall not be denied to thee, thou wise guest, said Thor with guile, if thou canst tell me all that I want to know. That I can do, answered the dwarf confidently. Tell me then, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is the earth, which lies about the sons of men, called by all different beings that are? It is earth among men, field among the heroes. The Vanes call it Way, the giants call it evergreen, the elves call it growing, and the high gods call it clay. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is heaven called by all the beings that are? 'Tis heaven among men, warmer among the heroes. The Vanes call it Windwoof, the giants call it High Home, the elves call it Fair Roof, and dwarfs Drip Hall. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is the moon that all men see called by all the beings that are? 'Tis moon among men, Mylin among the heroes, whirling wheel in hell, hastened by the giants, seen by the dwarfs, while the elves call it year-teller. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is the sun that all men see called by all the beings that are? 'Tis Sol among men, sun among the heroes. The dwarfs call it Day's child, the giants call it Everglow, farewell the elves, and all cheer the sons of the Anses. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How are the clouds that are mingled with shadows called by all the beings that are? Sky among men, shower boulder among the heroes, windflow among the Vanes, wet boulder among the giants, Weddermane among the elves, and in hell they call it Helm of Darkness. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is the wind that travels so far called by all the beings that are? Wind among men, waver among the heroes, whoopa among the giants. The elves call it soft gale, in hell they call it Wisselgust. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is the calm that rests called by all the beings that are? Calm it is called among men, lee among the heroes. The Vanes call it Windslack, the giants call it sultry, the elves soul of the day, and the dwarfs day's rest. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. What is the main which men row over, called by all the beings that are? It is sea among men, level among the heroes, wave among the veins, sound hum among the giants. The elves call it sea blink, and the dwarfs call it deep. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is fire that burns before the sons of men called by all the beings that are? It is fire among men, and fire among the heroes. The veins call it wavy, greedy the giants, furnace fire the dwarfs, and in hell they call it destroyer. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is the wood that grows before the sons of men called by all the beings that are? It is wood among men, wildfire among the heroes. In hell it is cliff-wrack. Giants call it firewood, the elves fair foliage, and the veins call it wand. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is night, Norvis's daughter, called by all the beings that are? Night among men, Nool among the heroes, Unlight the giants, Sleep-joy the elves, and the dwarfs call it sleep fairy. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is the seed that the sons of men so called by all the beings that are? Big among men, barley among the heroes, the veins call it vaxt, oat the giants, the elf's lee staff, in hell it is blight. Tell me, Allwise, for methinks thou, dwarf, knowest the whole history of mankind. How is the ale the sons of men drink, called by all the beings that are? Ale among men, beer among the heroes, the veins call it draught, clear lees the giants, in hell it is mead, while the dwarfs call it good cheer. Now, said Thor, I never on one man's tongue saw more of the olden words, but with great vials, Allwise, hast thou been beguiled, for the day is upon thee, dwarf, the hall is full of sunshine. It was even as Thor said, the day had come, and with it the dwarf, who had been kept in close talk without guessing why, was suddenly turned into a figure of stone, and the heroes were relieved of their rash promise to send the beautiful Freya from Asgard as wife of the dark, loving Allwise. The Scandinavian dwarf, having resumed his place, Oberon turned to his queen and said that her Nymphidia had given them all a very pretty little song. Perhaps some of her attendants had stories they would like to tell. Of course they have, replied Titania, and turned to the fairies immediately about her throne, saying, Now who shall it be? Quick, as befitted her name, was the first to respond with, If a very short story will do, I can tell one. And Pink, almost in the same breath, said, I could tell one if a very short one will do. Titania stopped the others, who would have offered also, and said, Quick and Pink shall tell them then. At once Quick took her place, and when all the fairy kingdom was attentive, began to tell about the fairy at the well. End of section 36. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 37 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Fairy at the Well. There was once a widow who had 2 daughters. The elder was so like her mother in temper and face that to have seen the one was to have seen the other. They were both so disagreeable and proud that it was impossible to live with them. The younger, who was the exact portrait of her father in her kindly and polite ways, was also as beautiful a girl as one could see. As we are naturally fond of those who resemble us, the mother doted on her elder daughter, while for the younger she had a most violent aversion, and made her take her meals in the kitchen and work hard all day. Among other things that she was obliged to do, this poor child was forced to go twice a day to fetch water from a place a mile or more from the house, and carry back a large jug filled to the brim. As she was standing one day by this spring, a poor woman came up to her and asked the girl to give her some water to drink. "Certainly, my good woman," she replied, and the beautiful girl at once stooped and rinsed out the jug, and then, filling it with water from the clearest part of the spring, she held it up to the woman, continuing to support the jug that she might drink with greater comfort. Having drunk, the woman said to her, "You are so beautiful, so good and kind, that I cannot refrain from conferring a gift upon you." For she was really a fairy, who had taken the form of a poor village woman in order to see how far the girl's kind-heartedness would go. "This gift I make you," continued the fairy, "that with every word you speak, either a flower or a precious stone will fall from your mouth." The girl had no sooner reached home than her mother began scolding her for being back so late. "I am sorry, mother," said she, "to have been out for so long," and as she spoke there fell from her mouth 2 roses, 2 pearls, and 2 large diamonds. The mother gazed at her in astonishment. "What do I see?" she exclaimed. "Pearls and diamonds seem to be dropping from her mouth. How is this, my daughter?" It was the first time she had called her daughter. The poor child related in all simplicity what had happened, letting fall quantities of diamonds in the course of her narrative. "I must certainly send my other daughter there," said the mother. "Look, Fanchon, see what falls from your sister's mouth when she speaks. Would you not be glad to receive a similar gift? All you have to do is go and fetch water from the spring, and if an old woman asks you for some to drink, to give it her nicely and politely." "I should like to see myself go into the spring," answered the rude, cross girl. "I insist on your going," rejoined the mother, "and that at once." The elder girl went off, still grumbling. With her she took the handsomest silver bottle she could find in the house. She had no sooner arrived at the spring than she saw a lady magnificently dressed walking towards her from the wood, who approached and asked for some water to drink. It was the same fairy who had appeared to the sister, but she had now put on the airs and apparel of a princess, and she wished to see how far this girl's rudeness would go. "Do you think I came here just to draw water for you?" answered the arrogant and unmannerly girl. "I have, of course, brought this silver bottle on purpose for madam to drink from. Well, all I have to say is, drink from it if you like." "You are scarcely polite," said the fairy, without losing her temper. "However, as you are so disobliging, I confer this gift upon you, that with every word you speak, a snake or a toad shall fall from your mouth." Directly her mother caught sight of her, she called out, "Well, my daughter?" "Well, my mother," replied the ill-tempered girl, throwing out as she spoke 2 vipers and 2 toads. "Alack!" cried the mother, "what do I see? This is her sister's doing, but I'll pay her out for it." And so saying, she ran towards the younger girl with intent to beat her. The unhappy girl fled from the house and went and hid herself in a neighbouring forest. The king's son, who was returning from hunting, met her, and seeing how beautiful she was, asked her what she was doing there all alone and why she was crying. "Alas, sir, my mother has driven me from home." The king's son, seeing 5 or 6 pearls and as many diamonds falling from her mouth as she spoke, asked her to explain how this was, and she told him all her tale. The king's son fell in love with her, and thinking that such a gift as she possessed was worth more than any ordinary dower brought by another, he carried her off to his father's palace, and there married her. As for her sister, she made herself so hated that her own mother drove her from the house. The miserable girl, having gone about in vain trying to find someone who would take her in, crept away into the corner of a wood and there died. Of higher worth are gentle words than diamonds or gold, and even o'er the minds of men a greater power they hold. It costs some pains to be polite, and needs some kindly thought, but soon or late, as here you see, reward will come unsought." "I hope that quick was short enough," said Titania laughingly, and then turning to Pink said, "And yours?" "Will be shorter still, your Majesty," promptly answered Pink, stepping to the stool directly Quick had left it, and beginning at once the story of Dolly Draw the Cake. End of section 37. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 38. Of the Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dolly Draw the Cake. At an early age, Saint Dolly showed the sweetness of her nature by her tender love for her widowed father, a baker, dwelling at Pie Corner with a large family of little children. It chanced that with bad harvests, bread became so dear that, of course, bakers were ruined by high prices. The miller fell upon Dolly's father and swept the shop with his golden thumb. Not a bed was left for the baker or his little ones. Saint Dolly slept on a flour sack, having prayed that good angels would help her to help her father. Now sleeping, she dreamt that the oven was lighted, and she felt falling in a shower about her raisins, currants, almonds, lemon peel, flour, with heavy drops of brandy. Then in her dreams she saw the fairies gather up the things that fell and knead them into a cake. They put the cake into the oven, and dancing round and round, the fairies vanished, crying, "Draw the cake, Dolly, Dolly, draw the cake." And Dolly awoke and drew the cake, and behold, it was the first 12th cake, sugared at the top and bearing the images of faith, hope, and charity. Now this cake, shown in the window, came to the king's ear, and the king bought the cake and married Dolly to his grand Faulkner, whom she proved a faithful and loving wife, bearing him a baker's dozen of lovely children. There was a general laugh at Pink's story. It was so very short, and Pink felt quite proud of herself in having got through her tale-telling about twice as quickly as Quick.
"Only 2 more stories," said Oberon, "and then all must fly back to their proper work as fairies. There are so many of us here that would like to take a turn on the tale-teller's stool that it is now not easy to choose. So we will have our next story from the first fairy who can get on the stool. But wait,
For as soon as Oberon spoke, the rush began.
you must all go to your places and start fair when I say 3.
There was a pause, while all settled back in their places, and then Oberon said, slowly,
1, 2, 3.
As soon as the last word was heard, there was such a scramble and rush from all parts of the ring, some running, some flying, but the nimblest of all was a kobold, who seated himself firmly on the stool and would not let himself be pushed off. As soon as it was seen that the stool was occupied, all the fairies who had tried to get there went laughing merrily back to their places, and the kobold triumphantly began the story of The Little Glass Shoe.
A peasant named John Wild found one time a glass shoe on one of the hills where the little people used to dance. He clapped it instantly into his pocket and ran away with it, keeping his hand as close on his pocket as if he had a dove in it. For he knew that he had found a treasure which the underground people must redeem at any price. Others say that John Wild lay in ambush one night for the underground people and gained an opportunity of pulling off one of their shoes by stretching himself there with a brandy bottle beside him and acting like one that was dead drunk. For he was a very cunning man, not over-scrupulous in his morals, and had taken in many a one by his craftiness, and, on this account, his name was in no good repute among his neighbours, who, to say the truth, were willing to have as little to do with him as possible.
Many hold too that he was acquainted with forbidden arts, and used to carry on an intercourse with the fiends and old women that raised storms and such like. However, be this as it may, when John had gotten the shoe, he lost no time in letting the folks that dwell under the ground know that he had it. So, at midnight, he went to the 9 hills, and cried with all his might, John Wild of Rodenkirchen has got a beautiful glass shoe. Who will buy it? Who will buy it? For he knew that the little one who had lost the shoe must go barefoot till he got it again. That is no trifle, for the little people have generally to walk upon very hard and stony ground. John's advertisement was speedily attended to. The little fellow who had lost the shoe made no delay in setting about redeeming it. The first free day he got, that he might come out into the daylight, he came as a respectable merchant, and knocked at John Wild's door, and asked if John had not a glass shoe to sell. For, says he, they are an article now in great demand, and are sought for in every market. John replied that it was true. He had a very little, nice, pretty little glass shoe, but it was so small that even a dwarf's foot would be squeezed in it, and that God Almighty must make people on purpose for it, before it could be of any use. But that, for all that, it was an extraordinary shoe, and a valuable shoe, and a dear shoe, and it was not every merchant that could afford to pay for it. The merchant asked to see it, and when he had examined it, glass shoes, said he, are not by any means such rare articles, my good friend, as you think here in Rodenkirchen, because you do not happen to go much in the world. However, said he, after hemming a little, I will give you a good price for it, because I happen to have the very fellow of it. And he bids a countryman $1,000 for it. $1,000 are money, my father used to say when he drove fat oxen to the market, replied John Wild in a mocking tone. But it will not leave my hands for that shabby price, and for my own part, it may ornament the foot of my daughter's doll. Hark ye, friend, I have heard a sort of little song sung about the glass shoe, and it is not for a parcel of dirt that it will go out of my hands. Tell me now, my good fellow, should you happen to know the knack of it, that in every furrow I make when I am ploughing, I should find a ducat? If not, the shoe is still mine, and you may inquire for glass shoes at those other markets. The merchant made still a great many attempts, and twisted and turned in every direction to get the shoe. But when he found the farmer inflexible, he agreed to what John desired, and swore to the performance of it. Cunning John believed in him, and gave him up the glass shoe, for he knew right well with whom he had to do. So the business being ended, away went the merchant with his glass shoe. Without a moment's delay, John repaired to his stable, got ready his horses and his plough, and drove out to the field. He selected a piece of ground where he would have the shortest turns possible, and began to plough. Hardly had the plough turned up the first sod, when up sprang a ducat out of the ground, and it was the same with every fresh furrow he made. There was now no end of his ploughing, and John Wild soon bought 8 new horses, and put them into the stable to the 8 he already had, and their mangers were never without plenty of oats in them, that he may be able to every 2 hours to yoke 2 fresh horses, and so be enabled to drive them faster. John was now insatiable in ploughing. Every morning he was out before sunrise, and many a time he ploughed on after midnight. Summer and winter it was plough with him evermore, except when the ground was frozen as hard as a stone. But he always ploughed by himself, and never suffered anyone to go out with him, or to come to him when he was at work. For John understood too well the nature of his crop, to let people see what it was he ploughed so constantly for. But it fared far worse with himself than with his horses, who ate good oats, and were regularly changed and relieved, while he grew pale and meagre by reason of his continual working and toiling. His wife and children had no longer any comfort of him. He never went to the alehouse or the club. He withdrew himself from everyone, and scarcely ever spoke a single word, but went about silent and wrapped up in his own thoughts. All the day long he toiled for his ducats, and at night he had to count them, and to plan and meditate how he might find out a still swifter kind of plough. His wife and the neighbours lamented over his strange conduct, his dullness and melancholy, and began to think that he was grown foolish. Everybody pitied his wife and children, for they imagined that the numerous horses that he kept in his stable, and the preposterous mode of agriculture that he pursued with his unnecessary and superfluous ploughing, must soon leave him without house or land. But their anticipations were not fulfilled. True it is, the poor man never enjoyed a happy or contented hour since he began to plough the ducats up out of the ground. The old saying held good in his case, that he who gives himself up to the pursuit of gold is halfway in the claws of the evil one. Flesh and blood cannot bear perpetual labour, and John Wilde did not long hold out against this running through the furrows night and day. He got through the first spring, but one day in the second, he dropped down at the tail of the plough like an exhausted November fly. Out of the pure thirst after gold, he was wasted away, and dried up to nothing, whereas he had been a very strong and hearty man the day the shoe of the little underground man fell into his hands. His wife, however, found after him a considerable treasure, 2 great nailed-up chests full of good new ducats, and his sons purchased large estates for themselves, and became lords and noblemen. But what good did all that do poor John Wilde? "And now," said the king, "we come to our last story, and I think it shall be told us by the fairy who comes from the furthest north." Several dwarfs and elves started up at his word, but the king signalled them back to their places. "No," he said, "none of you is the one from the farthest north." Then slowly up the middle of the circle came a quaint little figure, all in white, with long white hair and beard, looking only, of course the idea is ridiculous, like an old fairy. He had come from the land of perpetual winter, where everything is white as the everlasting snow. But though he looked old, he was lively and youthful as the most frolicsome of the flower fairies there. He skipped briskly onto the stool, then passing his hand down his long white beard. Strange guest, where all was so brilliantly coloured. He began a story which he named East of the Sun and West of the Moon. End of section 38. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 39 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. East of the Sun and West of the Moon. Part 1. Once on a time, there was a poor husbandman who had so many children that he hadn't much of either food or clothing to give them. Pretty children they all were, but the prettiest was the youngest daughter, who was so lovely there was no end to her loveliness. So one day, 'twas on a Thursday evening, late, at the fall of the year, the weather was so wild and rough outside, and it was so cruelly dark, and rain fell and wind blew, till the walls of the cottage shook again. There they all sat, round the fire, busy with this thing and that. But just then, all at once, something gave 3 taps on the window pane. Then the father went out to see what was the matter, and when he got out of doors, what should he see but a great big white bear. "Good evening to you," said the white bear, "The same to you," said the man. "Will you give me your youngest daughter? If you will, I'll make you as rich as you are now poor," said the bear. Well, the man would not be at all sorry to be so rich, but still, he thought he must have a bit of a talk with his daughter first. So he went in and told them how there was a great white bear waiting outside, who had given his word to make them so rich if he could only have the youngest daughter. The lassie said no outright. Nothing could get her to say anything else. So the man went out and settled it with the white bear, that he should come again the next Thursday evening and get an answer. Meantime, he talked his daughter over, and kept on telling her of all the riches they would get, and how well off she would be herself. So at last she thought better of it, and washed and mended her rags, made herself as smart as she could, and was ready to start. I can't say her packing gave her much trouble. Next Thursday evening came the white bear to fetch her, and she got upon his back with her bundle, and off they went. So when they had gone a bit of the way, the white bear said, "Are you afraid?" No, she wasn't. "Well, mind and hold tight by my shaggy coat, and then there's nothing to fear," said the bear. So she rode a long, long way, till they came to a great steep hill. There, on the face of it, the white bear gave a knock, and a door opened, and they came into a castle where there were many rooms, all lit up, rooms gleaming with silver and gold, and there too was a table ready laid, and it was all as grand could be. Then the white bear gave her a silver bell, saying that if she rang it when she wanted anything, she would get it at once. Well, after she had eaten and drunk, and evening wore on, she got sleepy after her journey, and thought she would like to go to bed. So she rang the bell, and she had scarce taken hold of it before she came into a chamber, where there was a bed made, as fair and white as anyone could wish to sleep in, with silken pillows, and curtains and gold fringe. All that was in the room was gold or silver, but when she had gone to bed and put out the light, a man came and laid himself alongside her. That was the white bear, who threw off his beast shape at night, but she never saw him, for he always came after she had put out the light, and before the day dawned he was up and off again. So things went on, happily, for a while. But at last she began to get silent and sorrowful, for there she went about all day alone, and she longed to go home to see her father and mother and brothers and sisters. So one day, when the white bear asked what it was that she lacked, she said it was so dull and lonely there, and how she longed to go home to see her father and mother and brothers and sisters, and that was why she was so sad and sorrowful, because she couldn't get to them. "Well, well," said the bear, "perhaps there's a cure for all this, but you must promise me one thing, not to talk alone with your mother, but only when the rest are by to hear, for she'll take you by the hand and try to lead you into a room alone to talk. But you must mind and not do that, else you'll bring bad luck on both of us." So one Sunday the white bear came and said now they could set off to see her father and mother. Well, off they started, she sitting on his back, and they went far and long. At last they came to a grand house, and there her brothers and sisters were running about out of doors at play, and everything was so pretty. 'Twas a joy to see. "This is where your father and mother live now," said the white bear. But don't forget what I told you, else you'll make us both unlucky." No, bless her, she'd not forget. And when she had reached the house, the white bear turned right about and left her. Then, when she went in to see her father and mother, there was such joy. There was no end to it. None of them thought they could thank her enough for all she had done for them. Now they had everything they wished, as good could be, and they all wanted to know how she got on, where she lived. Well, she said, it was very good to live where she did. She had all she wished. What she said beside, I don't know, but I don't think any of them had the right end of the stick, or that they got much out of her. But so, in the afternoon, after they had done dinner, all happened as the white bear had said. Her mother wanted to talk with her alone in her bedroom, but she minded what the white bear had said and wouldn't go upstairs. "Oh, what we have to talk about we'll keep," she said, and put her mother off. But somehow or other, her mother got round her at last, and she had to tell her the whole story. So she said how every night, when she had gone to bed, a man came and lay down beside her as soon as she had put out the light. How she never saw him, because he was always up and away before the morning dawned. And how she went about woeful and sorrowing, for she thought she should so much like to see him, and how all day long she walked about there alone, and how dull, dreary, and lonesome it was. "My," said her mother, "it may well be a troll you slept with. But now I'll teach you a lesson how to set eyes on him. I'll give you a bit of candle, which you can carry home in your bosom, just like that when he is asleep. But take care not to drop the tallow on him." Yes, she took the candle and hid it in her bosom, and as night drew on, the white bear came and fetched her away. But when they had gone a bit of the way, the white bear asked if all hadn't happened as he had said. Well, she couldn't say it hadn't. "Now mind," said he, "if you have listened to your mother's advice, you have brought bad luck on us both, and then all that has passed between us will be as nothing." No, she said, she hadn't listened to her mother's advice. So when she reached home and had gone to bed, it was the old story over again. There came a man and lay down beside her. But at dead of night, when she heard he slept, she got up and struck a light, lit the candle, and let the light shine on him. And so she saw that he was the loveliest prince one ever set eyes on, and she fell so deep in love with him on the spot that she thought she couldn't live if she didn't give him a kiss there and then. And so she did. But as she kissed him, she dropped 3 hot drops of tallow on his shirt, and he woke up. "What have you done?" he cried. "Now you have made us both unlucky, for had you held out only this 1 year, I had been freed, for I have a stepmother who has bewitched me so that I am a white bear by day and a man by night. But now all ties are snapped between us. Now I must set off from you to her. She lives in a castle which stands east of the sun and west of the moon, and there too is a princess with a nose 3 ells long, and she's the wife I must have now." She wept and took it ill, but there was no help for it. Go he must. End of section 39. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 40 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. East of the Sun and West of the Moon. Part 2. Then she asked if she mightn't go with him. No, she mightn't. Tell me the way then, she said, and I'll search you out. That surely I may get leave to do. Yes, she might do that, he said, but there was no way to that place. It lay east of the sun and west of the moon, and thither she'd never find her way. So next morning when she woke up, both prince and castle were gone, and then she lay on a little green patch in the midst of the gloomy thick wood, and by her side lay the same bundle of rags she had brought with her from her old home. So when she had rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and wept till she was tired, she set out on her way, and walked many, many days, till she came to a lofty rock. Under it sat an old hag, and played with a golden apple, which she tossed about. Here the lassie asked if she knew the way to the prince, who lived with his stepmother in the castle that lay east of the sun and west of the moon, and who was to marry the princess with a nose 3 ells long. How did you come to know about him? Asked the old hag. But maybe you were the lassie who ought to have had him. Yes, she was. So it's you, is it? Said the old hag. Well, all I know about him is that he lives in the castle that lies east of the sun and west of the moon, and thither you'll come, late or never. But still, you may have the loan of my horse, and on him you can ride to my next neighbour. Maybe she'll be able to tell you. And when you get there, just give the horse a switch under the left ear, and beg him to be off home. And stay, this gold apple you may take with you. So she got upon the horse, and rode a long, long time, till she came to another rock, under which sat another old hag, with a gold carding comb. Here the lassie asked if she knew the way to the castle that lay east of the sun and west of the moon, and she answered, like the first old hag, that she knew nothing about it except it was east of the sun, west of the moon, and thither you'll come, late or never. But you shall have the loan of my horse to get to my next neighbour. Maybe she'll tell you all about it. And when you get there, just switch the horse under the left ear, and beg him to be off home. And this old hag gave her the golden carding comb. It might be she'd find the use for it, she said. So the lassie got up on the horse, and rode a far, far way, and a weary time. And so at last she came to another great rock, under which sat another old hag, spinning with a golden spinning wheel. Here, too, she asked if she knew the way to the prince, and where the castle was that lay east of the sun and west of the moon. So it was, the same thing again. Maybe it's you that ought to have had the prince, said the old hag. Yes, it was. But she, too, didn't know the way a bit better than the other two. East of the sun and west of the moon it was, she knew. That was all. And thither you'll come, late or never. But I'll lend you my horse, and then I think you'd best ride to the east wind and ask him. Maybe he knows those parts, and can blow you thither. But when you get to him, you need only give the horse a switch under the left ear, and he'll trot home of himself. And so, too, she gave her the gold spinning wheel. Maybe you'll find a use for it, said the old hag. Then on she rode, many, many days, a weary time before she got to the east wind's house. But at last she did reach it, and then she asked the east wind if he could tell her the way to the prince who dwelt east of the sun and west of the moon. Yes, the east wind had often heard tell of it, the prince and the castle, but he couldn't tell the way, for he had never blown so far. But if you will, I'll go with you to my brother the West Wind. Maybe he knows, for he's much stronger. So if you will, just get on my back. I'll carry you thither. Yes, she got on his back, and I should just think they went briskly along. So when they got there, they went into the West Wind's house, and the East Wind said the lassie he had brought was the one who ought to have had the prince, who lived in the castle east of the sun and west of the moon. And so she had set out to seek him, and how he had come with her, and would be glad to know if the West Wind knew how to get to the castle. Nay, said the West Wind, so far I've never blown, but if you will, I'll go with you to our brother the South Wind, for he's much stronger than either of us, and he has flapped his wings far and wide. Maybe he'll tell you. You can get on my back, and I'll carry you to him. Yes, she got on his back, and so they travelled to the South Wind, and weren't so very long on the way, I should think. When they got there, the West Wind asked him if he could tell her the way to the castle that lay east of the sun and west of the moon, for it was she that ought to have had the prince who lived there. You don't say so. That's she, is it? Said the South Wind. Well, I have blustered about in most places in my time, but so far I have never blown. But if you will, I'll take you to my brother the North Wind. He is the oldest and the strongest of the whole lot of us, and if he don't know where it is, you'll never find anyone in the world to tell you. You can get on my back, and I'll carry you thither. Yes, she got on his back, and away he went from his house at a fine rate, and this time, too, she wasn't long on her way. So when they got to the North Wind's house, he was so wild and cross, cold puffs came from him a long way off. Now then, what do you want? He bawled out to them ever so far off, so that it struck them with an icy shiver. Well, said the South Wind, you needn't be so put out, for here I am your brother the South Wind, and here is the lassie who ought to have had the prince, who dwells in the castle that lies east of the sun and west of the moon. And now she wants to ask you if you ever were there, and can tell her the way, for she would be so glad to find him again. Yes, I know well enough where it is, said the North Wind. Once in my life I blew an aspen leaf thither, but I was so tired I couldn't blow a puff for ever so many days after it. But if you really wish to go thither, and aren't afraid to come along with me, I'll take you on my back, and see if I can blow you thither. Yes, with all her heart. She must and would get thither if it were possible in any way, and as for fear, however madly he went, she wouldn't be at all afraid. Very well then, said the North Wind, but you must sleep here tonight, for we must have the whole day before us if we're to get there at all. Early next morning, the North Wind woke her, and puffed himself up, and blew himself out, and made himself so stout and big, 'twas gruesome to look at him, and so off they went, high up through the air, as if they would never stop, till they got to the world's end. Down here below there was such a storm. It threw down long tracts of wood and many houses, and when it swept over the great sea, ships foundered by hundreds. So they tore on, and on. No one can believe how far they went, and all the while they still went over the sea, and the North Wind got more and more weary. And so out of breath, he could scarce bring out a puff, and his wings drooped and drooped, till at last he sunk so low that the crests of the waves dashed over his heels. "Are you afraid?" said the North Wind. No, she wasn't. But they weren't very far from land, and the North Wind had still so much strength left in him that he managed to throw her up on the shore under the windows of the castle, which lay east of the sun and west of the moon. But then he was so weak and worn out, he had to stay there and rest many days before he could get home again. Next morning, the lassie sat down under the castle window and began to play with the golden apple, and the first person she saw was the long-nose who was to have the prince. "What do you want for your gold apple, you lassie?" said the long-nose, and threw up the window. "It's not for sale, for gold or money," said the lassie. "If it's not for sale for gold or money, what is it that you will sell it for? You may name your own price," said the princess. "Well, if I may get to the prince who lives here and be with him tonight, you shall have it," said the lassie, whom the North Wind had brought. Yes, she might. That could be done. So the princess got the gold apple. But when the lassie came up to the prince's bedroom at night, he was fast asleep. She called him and shook him, and between whiles she wept sore. But all she could do, she couldn't wake him up. Next morning, as soon as day broke, came the princess with the long nose, and drove her out again. So in the daytime, she sat under the castle windows and began to card with her golden carding comb, and the same thing happened. The princess asked what she wanted for it, and she said it wasn't for sale, for gold or money, but if she might get leave to go up to the prince and be with him that night, the princess should have it. But when she went up, she found him fast asleep again, and all she called and all she shook and wept and prayed, she couldn't get life into him. And as soon as the first grey peep of day came, then came the princess with the long nose, and chased her out again. So in the daytime, the lassie sat down outside under the castle window and began to spin with her golden spinning wheel, and that too the princess with the long nose wanted to have. So she threw up the window and asked what she wanted for it. The lassie said, as she had said twice before, it wasn't for sale, for gold or money, but if she might go up to the prince who was there and be with him alone that night, she might have it. Yes, she might do that, and welcome. But now you must know, there were some folk who had been carried off thither, and as they sat in their room, which was next the prince, they had heard how a woman had been in there and wept and prayed and called to him 2 nights running, and they told that to the prince. That evening, when the princess came with her sleepy drink, the prince made as if he drank, but threw it over his shoulder, for he could guess it was a sleepy drink. So when the lassie came in, she found the prince wide awake, and then she told him the whole story, how she had come thither. "Ah," said the prince, "you've just come in the very nick of time, for tomorrow is to be our wedding day. But now I won't have the long nose, and you are the only woman in the world who can set me free. I'll say I want to see what my wife is fit for, and beg her to wash the shirt which has the 3 spots of tallow on it. She'll say yes, for she doesn't know 'tis you who put them there. But that's a work only for Christian folk, and not for such a pack of trolls. So I'll say that I won't have any other for my bride than the woman who can wash them out, and ask you to do it." So there was great joy and love between them all that night. But next day, when the wedding was to be, the prince said, "First of all, I'd like to see what my bride is fit for." "Yes," said the stepmother, with all her heart. "Well," said the prince, "I've got a fine shirt which I'd like for my wedding shirt, but somehow or other it has got 3 spots of tallow on it, which I must have washed out, and I have sworn never to take any other bride than the woman who's able to do that. If she can't, she's not worth having." Well, that was no great thing, they said, so they agreed, and she with the long nose began to wash away as hard as she could. But the more she rubbed and scrubbed, the bigger the spots grew. "Ah," said the old hag, her mother, "you can't wash. Let me try." But she hadn't long taken the shirt in hand before it got far worse than ever, and with all her rubbing and wringing and scrubbing, the spots grew bigger and blacker, and the darker and uglier was the shirt. Then all the other trolls began to wash, but the longer it lasted, the blacker and uglier the shirt grew, till at last it was as black all over as if it had been up the chimney. "Ah," said the prince, "you're none of you worth a straw. You can't wash. Why, there outside sits a beggar lassie. I'll be bound she knows how to wash better than the whole lot of you. Come in, lassie," he shouted. Well, in she came. "Can you wash this shirt clean, lassie, you?" said he. "I don't know," she said, "but I think I can." And almost before she had taken it and dipped it in the water, it was as white as driven snow, and whiter still. "Yes, you are the lassie for me," said the prince. At that, the old hag flew into such a rage she burst on the spot, and the princess with the long nose after her, and the whole pack of trolls after her. At least, I've never heard a word about them since. As for the prince and princess, they set free all the poor folk who had been carried off and shut up there, and they took with them all the silver and gold, and flitted away as far as they could from the castle that lay east of the sun and west of the moon. "Not quite the last," exclaimed Queen Titania, and all the fairies who had begun to move hurried back to their places. "Not quite the last, for before we separate, I will sing a song that you may tell to all the human children that you meet, and it shall be called the song of Queen Titania or Queen Mab." End of section 41. Read by Bryn Roberts. Section 41 of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Queen Mab. A little fairy comes at night. Her eyes are blue, her hair is brown, with silver spots upon her wings, and from the moon she flutters down. She has a little silver wand, and when a good child goes to bed, she waves her wand from right to left, and makes a circle round its head. And then it dreams of pleasant things, of fountains filled with fairy fish, and trees that bear delicious fruit, and bow their branches at a wish, of arbours filled with dainty scents, from lovely flowers that never fade, bright flies that glitter in the sun, and glowworms shining in the shade, and talking birds with gifted tongues for singing songs and telling tales, and pretty dwarfs to show the way through fairy hills and fairy dales. But when a bad child goes to bed, from left to right she weaves her rings, and then it dreams all through the night of only ugly, horrid things. Then lions come, with glaring eyes, and tigers growl a dreadful noise, and ogres draw their cruel knives to shed the blood of girls and boys.
Then stormy waves rush on to drown, or raging flames come scorching round. Fierce dragons hover in the air, and serpents crawl along the ground. Then wicked children wake and weep, and wish the long black gloom away. But good ones love the dark, and find the night as pleasant as the day. When the song was finished, Oberon and Titania arose on their throne, and faint strains of music were heard in the air. For a moment, the whole place sparkled with light and colour, and then all the fairies had gone, in a flash, to their distant places, and nothing but a faint circle of darker grass showed where the great assembly had been. Away under a shady tree, Nick Bottom and his companions were fast asleep, and when they awakened again, they must have puzzled over what they had seen and heard, and which no doubt they believed that they had only dreamed. But we know better. End of section 41. End of The Reign of King Oberon by Walter Jerrold. Read by Bryn Roberts.